Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Dreamland Encounters. I'm Marcus Hale, and I've grown up around these fields, knowing every sound from the crickets to distant dogs barking without reason. Tonight was different. Late July brought a humid evening, thick with the usual countryside sounds. I was driving down the county road, hoping to clear my head, when something felt off. As I turned by Miller's, the road narrowed between tall corn stalks, and that's when I saw it. A white beam swept across the field with impossible precision. Not from a car or flashlight, this was something else entirely. It moved in perfect, mechanical arcs, painting the corn without a sound. No motor, no hum. When the light passed over the plants, they lifted and settled without wind. I stopped the truck and killed the radio, letting the night speak for itself. The beam continued its methodical sweep, each pass identical to the last. Searching the field's edge revealed nothing. No truck, no trailer, no person who could be responsible. Standing where the gravel met the roadside roses, I felt the beam's strange quality up close. It moved too steadily to be handheld. The sound was wrong, less like wind and more like thick fabric sliding against something. Small, odd details began to accumulate. Mrs. Klein's porch light blinked once. Their dog barked twice and fell silent. Power lines hummed differently, as if the electrical current had been slightly adjusted. My phone lost its signal, and the radio dissolved into static. Then I saw it, deep in the cornfield. A shape that first looked like a deer but wasn't. It stood unnaturally still, between the rows. When the light swept across, its silhouette was crisp and pale, about a man's height but positioned wrong, tilted forward and completely motionless. I wanted to call out, to see if it was human, but my voice felt trapped. Another sweep of the light, and suddenly, nothing. The shape vanished without sound, without movement, as if the space had simply been erased. Time seemed to blur after that, my watch hands moving strangely, marking moments that felt both endless and instantaneous. The world felt uneven after the beam vanished. One moment it stuttered like someone fidgeting with a dial, and the next, nothing. Completely gone. Mrs. Klein confirmed seeing a flash, her porch light briefly dipping when we walked to the field's edge and found strange impressions. 3 or 4 steps, precise and flat, definitely not boot prints. Wind blurred their edges quickly. The town seemed to have continued without me, moving in a rhythm I'd momentarily stepped out of. No news reported anything unusual. Friends tossed out casual theories, surveyors, film crews, the obligatory UFO jokes mixed with disbelief, yet each explanation left more questions than answers. The light's hard stop, the complete silence. Something felt off. Days later, I returned with binoculars. The beam looked like a clean, sharp slit with no spillover or halo. When it crossed the field, corn bent in a perfect circular pattern, leaning from an unseen center. No tracks led in or out. I started documenting everything. My phone filled with notes, timestamps, small oddities. A bakery clock ran fast. A street lamp near the elevator flickered. The feed store's camera captured a single white frame where night should have been black. Nothing connected, yet everything felt strange. My own photos showed subtle shifts. Timestamps moved slightly when uploaded. A triple frame appeared where the beam crossed, which my camera dismissed as motion blur. My truck's clock ran slow for a week. Small mechanical things glitched and then reset themselves. Javier came out, thermos of coffee in hand, his skepticism a welcome perspective. We sat on my truck's tailgate, killing time with meaningless baseball talk. Then suddenly, the beam returned, sweeping with the same precise movement. His face caught in sharp lines of light, and for a moment I thought, something this exact can't be natural. Someone spun in a spot, and word spread quickly. Townsfolk emerged with cheap cameras, watching as the beam swept past, seemingly avoiding anyone on the road. A man with a hand spotlight walked the field's edge, and the beam hesitated before moving away. His voice shrank as he spoke about feeling watched. The sheriff's deputy arrived and wrote in the blot, "Light observed, no source found." The official language landed with a mix of comfort and dismissal. People tossed around theories, survey crews, pranks, testing equipment. Each explanation covered a piece of the puzzle but left other parts unexplained. Strange occurrences peppered that month. A county radio channel caught unexplained static. The feed store camera captured a single frame with an inexplicable white square. Mrs. Klein's porch light dipped randomly. A barn door opened momentarily on a windless night. A bakery clock ran fast for a day before correcting itself. These events didn't form a clear pattern but clustered like dust motes in a specific corner of air. I tracked the beam down a lane behind the Miller place and found a combine idling, lights off. No one was inside, and a faint ozone smell lingered. As I passed, my truck radio squealed briefly before falling silent. The Millers shrugged it off the next day, calling it an equipment hiccup. Months passed. The beam returned occasionally, always silent and clean. Sometimes, inexplicably, a ring of flattened corn would appear. Harvest arrived, changing the fields and nights. Life moved forward. Kids went back to school. The fair came. Invoices were paid. And town chatter shifted. I stopped camping on the tailgate every night, but still looked at the fields longer than necessary. My phone's list gathered dust, yet I kept the pictures. When I shared the story, people either nodded politely or tried to laugh it off. Javier left town for a job, hoping whatever it was had stayed behind. The beam never made a grand statement. It left small, precise hints and allowed ordinary life to absorb them. What struck me most was how everything snapped back as if nothing had happened. I came home each night. I slept. Life continued. I was 12 when I decided to camp in my backyard. June sprawled around me, heavy with cut grass and the faint smell of fried oil drifting from the corner diner. My name's Nate. Dad bought the pop-up tent after I promised to mow the lawn twice. I rolled out the sleeping bag and set my flashlight on the picnic table, leaving my phone on airplane mode to conserve its dying battery. The neighborhood hummed with its usual sounds: porch lights, passing cars, a radio murmuring through an open window. These small sounds usually made everything feel safe and normal. But that night, something felt different. The lamppost at the corner flickered like a stutter in someone's voice. Crickets were unusually quiet, more of a garden rustle than their typical chorus. Mum's silhouette moved at the kitchen sink, and when I glanced over for a moment it seemed like she was standing perfectly still with her hands in the water, though she was just rinsing plates. Lying on my back, I watched trees frame a slice of sky. Around 11:30, a brief wind swept through and then vanished, taking with it the distant dog's usual barking near the train tracks. I tried to convince myself these sounds were normal in their absence. Around midnight, my dog Scout woke me. He's a mutt with a bad back and a loud heart. I unzipped the tent and let him stretch, watching him settle on the porch step after a pretzel. At first, everything seemed ordinary. Then the barking erupted. Not just one or two dogs, but a rolling chorus that burst forth all at once. Yaps, deep barks, a long howl from the mastiff 3 houses over. The sound surged through the yard like wind. I scrambled up, grabbing my flashlight, my hands feeling strangely clumsy. Tom from across the street poked his head out of the garage, squinting at the sky. Porch lights clicked on in sequence as if someone was running past them with a switch. Chang stood in her slippers, towel in hand, sometimes while driving. On a slow curve of road, I would slow the truck and look. Suddenly, memories of lights slicing through fields in perfect arcs would appear. Then the night would return to ordinary, and I would continue driving home. Nighttime settled in with a strange rhythm. Dogs barked in a call and response pattern, their voices layering over each other. Small dogs answered big ones, creating an almost musical composition. Beneath the barking, a thin metallic tapping caught my attention, a distant, steady beat that felt slightly off. The contractor's LED sign at the end of the block flickered between 12:13 and 12:14, creating a subtle, unsettling moment. Something felt wrong, like a picture frame slightly askew. Scout stood rigid beside me, his ears pinned forward, refusing to move. Suddenly, the dogs went silent. Not a gradual fade, but an abrupt cut, like a theater going quiet mid-performance. The street dropped into an unnatural stillness. Scout froze, staring toward the trees. High above the back fences, where the tree line met the sky, a single point of light hung motionless. It wasn't a plane or a street lamp. This light had a bluish-pale center with a hazy rim, small enough to seem holdable, but positioned too high. It remained perfectly still, like a bead suspended on an invisible wire. People on the porches watched, transfixed. Tom muttered, "What the heck?" "Mrs. Rue," Chang whispered something. The light cast no beam or shadow. The air around it seemed to soften, as if the night itself blurred slightly where the light sat. I hoped someone would offer a rational explanation, a drone, test lights, anything ordinary. My phone buzzed unexpectedly, despite being in airplane mode. A blank white notification appeared from an unknown number. The battery dropped from 43% to 39% in moments. Something was definitely not right. Everything started normal, but then changed. The night scout and I were in the yard, the clocks taped to the garbage can, flickered and reset to the wrong time. The small electronics seemed disturbed. Climbing onto the picnic table, I aimed my flashlight toward a strange dot. The beam washed the air but did nothing. This tiny halo hung suspended, an eternity and 2 heartbeats long. I waited for movement, for something to make sense. Nothing happened. It remained quiet and precise. Suddenly, as abruptly as the dogs had fallen silent, the light vanished. Not a gradual dimming, but a complete disappearance that shifts the night's entire character. Porch lights extinguished. Residents retreated indoors. Tom shut his garage door. Scout nudged my hand, then curled beneath the picnic table, as if sleep could resolve the mystery. I stood there, feeling small, surrounded by darkness. Morning arrived with mundane familiarity. The lawn's uneven stripes remained unchanged. The picnic table's worn paint chips stayed exactly the same. Scout ate breakfast like no midnight alert had ever occurred. My mum listened to my story over toast, then dismissed it with a typical parental warning. Don't go wandering at night, before switching to discussing laundry. Curious follow-ups emerged later. The local police logged multiple reports of widespread dog barking, categorizing them as unusual events. A neighbor texted about grainy security camera footage showing a brief glow. A feed store customer claimed their radio went to static at midnight and cleared to reveal a muffled humming sound, like a man singing through cotton. Neighborhood conversations buzzed briefly before returning to routine, mowing lawns, buying feed. I never slept in the yard again after that summer. Scout grew older, preferring the porch to the grass. But occasionally, when the air feels still and metallic after a storm, I walk to the fence and search the tree line. The lamppost has been replaced. The trees have grown thicker. I pause, listening until familiar neighborhood sounds, TVs, children's voices, gradually reassert themselves. We drove out to the ridge on a late August night, expecting a crystal clear sky. My name's Noah, and my friend Leia wanted to escape the fluorescent lights of her studio while I hoped to see if the Perseids were worth all the hype. The old radio tower stood nearby, casting a lonely orange beam into the darkness. Everything started ordinary enough. We spread out blankets, set down a thermos of cheap coffee, and a bag of store-bought cookies. Leah brought her notebook to sketch constellations she couldn't name, and I had binoculars and a star chart taped to the dashboard, making me feel like I knew what I was looking at. Crickets buzzed in the brush, moths repeatedly thumped against the car, and the valley below glowed softly on the horizon. We lay back, letting the sky absorb us. A few minutes in, something felt subtly wrong. A plane traced a line across the northern sky, and then vanished behind the stars as if it had never existed. Leah nudged me, saying she thought the plane's edges went grey before disappearing. I joked about heat shimmer, but she insisted it was more like the plane had been erased. I wrote that down, the first item on a mental list I'd later try to make sense of. We watched meteors, pointing out bright streaks and timing their paths. The ham radio at the tower crackled to life, low and intermittent. When I reached for my phone to check the time, the screen went blank. Sometimes years later, I share fragments of that night over a beer or at family barbecues. My brother makes jokes about aliens. My uncle claims the countryside plays tricks. Mostly I keep the memory close. On still summer nights, I walk to the fence and scan the tree line. Once, 3 summers after that night, a faint pale pinprick winked near a roofline and vanished before I could fully register it. Nearby dogs fussed briefly, then fell silent as if someone had closed a book. The memory lives in that small, tight space under my ribs. No clear explanation exists. Just a lingering hush, the image of alert scouts, and a sense of the world holding its breath. The night was thick with small oddities. My wristwatch hung motionless, and the ham radio chatter drifted by, unremarkable. Static crawled through the conversation like a needle scratching across a record, and the tower light blinked in strange, stuttering Morse code. Leah and I were huddled together, jackets pulled tight, phones switched to airplane mode. We weren't looking to draw attention. Our eyes drifted to a faint arc of stars low on the eastern horizon, a cluster we usually overlooked. Leah was debating whether it was a remnant of the Milky Way or just light pollution's smear. That's when the grid appeared. At first, just a whisper, a pale, ruler, straight line stretching between 2 stars. I mistook it for an airplane trail, but it didn't fade. It held. Leah caught it too. Do you see that? A finger traced the sky as more lines emerged. 2, then 4, perfectly spaced like a translucent wire fence stitched across the starscape. These lines were so soft white they didn't strain the eyes. They sliced constellations into neat boxes, creating a map that seemed fundamentally wrong against the night sky. It was as if someone had projected a grid and then dialed down its opacity to barely a breath. We straightened, alert. Leah grabbed her sketchbook while I raised the binoculars. The grid wasn't just a few lines. It was a complete lattice stretching horizon to horizon. Thin, precise. It lingered for a moment that felt like a suspended breath, long enough to see Jupiter bisected by a line, long enough to spark real unease. Nothing about this made sense. No beams, no origin point, no ground-based projector could explain it. The air still carried pine and bakery scents, but the sound felt subtly muted, as if someone had turned down the background noise. Leah attempted to film the phenomenon. Her phone camera only produced a static smear where the grid should have been, the sensor unable to capture what our eyes were witnessing. We were on the ridge late at night, tired and hungry from the drive. My cheap DSLR sat useless beside me after the preview showed a black frame where a strange grid had crossed the starfield. Something was happening that our equipment couldn't register. We whispered, wondering if we were imagining things. Then the grid flickered softly, like a dimmer switch being adjusted. Thin vertical lines brightened momentarily, and the stars seemed to ripple outward behind this invisible net. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just a precise, faint modulation that made my skin crawl. The entire event lasted maybe 12 seconds. One moment the lattice was there, precise and clean. The next, nothing but sky, no fade, no trail. The ham radio at the tower resumed its chatter, uninterested. The tower light stopped its erratic blinking. My phone's clock snapped back to normal. That cold silence after something extraordinary hung between us. We talked to settle our nerves. It looked like a net, Leah said. I responded. Like someone ghost-meshed the universe. We mentally catalogued the strange details. No sound, equipment failure, unnaturally geometric grid. We wondered if anyone else had seen it. Hikers? The tower operator? But in that moment, the ridge was our private world, momentarily rearranged by something inexplicable. Back at my truck, everything was mundane again. The car clock showed the same time. Country music played on the radio. Leo wanted to go back and find witnesses. I wanted to be somewhere normal, around people. We compromised at the only 24-hour diner, ordering strong coffee and staring into the steam. Over our cups, we quietly explored possibilities. Projectors on the tower, some experimental technology. Our theories were hushed, tentative, the way people discuss things they can barely believe they've seen. Late one summer evening, after finishing a double shift at the hospital, I drove out to Silver Pine Lake. The night unfolded with an unsettling stillness. Leah's hands trembled slightly as she traced a grid on a napkin, the diner's TV showing nothing unusual. Around us, the late-night crowd consisted of truck drivers discussing weather and a woman knitting at the counter. Just another ordinary evening. When we went to wash our mugs, no one mentioned anything about what we'd seen. I started feeling slightly foolish, like someone chasing a mirage and trying to validate it with evidence. The next day, I cautiously emailed the ham club at the tower. "Were you all testing anything late last night?" I asked. A terse reply came from an unfamiliar call sign. No tests scheduled. Tower on routine maintenance. Nothing reported. Leah uploaded a short video clip with its strange static smear. Her friends responded with half-hearted jokes about compression artifacts. An online astronomy forum explored potential explanations. Camera sensor overload, digital sampling, aliasing, the brain's tendency to fill in missing data. All reasonable answers, yet none explained the peculiar sensation I'd experienced. That moment when something small and precise seemed to reach past the stars and touch the space near my ribs. A week later, we returned to the ridge, more driven by curiosity than fear. That night, the sky was a complicated tangle of clouds, and we left early, feeling somewhat disappointed. Yet the experience lingered. Now, on random Tuesdays when the city buzzes and streetlights shine their usual glow, I'll suddenly look up and imagine a faint mesh overlaying the sky. I've begun to wonder if these grids can only be projected under specific conditions, enough darkness and a shared witness. Leah and I discuss it less frequently now, and when we do, our conversation feels delicate, like recounting a storm that wasn't quite a storm. Some nights, I find myself opening my camera, pointing it toward the clearest part of the sky, half expecting the sensors to reject me again. Most times they behave normally. Stars, planets, satellites, nothing extraordinary. But occasionally, when a cloud forms an unusually straight line, or a contrail hangs suspiciously precise, my breath catches. I turned my head, waiting to see if something impossible might momentarily spread a net across the sky before vanishing without a trace. I was at the lake about an hour from my Spokane apartment, a spot hidden behind a dense wall of pine and fir that muffled road noise. The sky was a deep indigo, backed with stars that softly reflected on the lake's surface. No clouds interrupted the darkness. My routine was simple: arrive, park in the small gravel lot, grab my backpack. Inside were the essentials: cold coffee in a thermos, a notebook, and a small flashlight. I wanted to walk down to the shore, sit, maybe write something, and just let my mind settle. The lot was empty, which wasn't surprising. Sunset typically cleared out most visitors, and even the distant campground looked quiet and dark. The walk down was peaceful. Pine needles crunched beneath my feet, and occasionally something small, maybe a raccoon, would rustle through the nearby brush. The air was completely still. When I reached the shore, I dropped my bag and settled onto a flat rock, legs dangling over the water's edge. A sip of coffee, a deep breath to shake off my exhaustion, and I stared out across the lake. That's when I saw it. A faint glow beneath the water directly in front of me. This wasn't moonlight. There was no moon, but something moving slowly under the surface. A soft white-green luminescence that seemed strange because the water wasn't moving. Instead, perfect ripples radiated outward in concentric circles, as if the water itself was vibrating with light. I leaned forward, trying to understand. Was it algae? A distant campsite reflection? But there were no lights, just trees, rocks, and water. The ripples spread in a hypnotic, steady rhythm. Curious, I reached for my flashlight, initially just wanting to get my bearings. When I switched it on and pointed toward the water, the glow dimmed. As I lifted the beam, scanning the tree line, and then back to the lake, the light intensified. Now it formed a small dome rising just beneath the surface. This wasn't natural. I swallowed hard, watching the glow slowly move upward in a perfect sphere. The metallic clicking jolted me awake, sharp, precise, completely unlike any neighborhood sound. My phone read 2 a.m. when I thumbed the screen, which then went dark. No notifications, but something felt off about the house. I was at the lake earlier, watching something extraordinary emerge from the water. It rose smoothly, no splashing, no surface disturbance. Ripples radiated out from its point of emergence, steady and strange. My voice caught in my throat. I reached for my phone, screen lighting up, but no signal. Not that it would have mattered. Who would believe what I was seeing? The sphere moved silently, perfectly round, with smooth edges, ascending straight upward. It passed above the tree line, a faint glow against the starry sky. I blinked, half expecting it to vanish, but it remained, drifting slowly upward. The world around me was utterly silent. No birds, no wind, no insects, only the occasional lap of water against the shore and those ripples that seemed to emanate from the lake itself, carried by the sphere. I watched until it disappeared into the night sky, growing smaller and smaller until the last glimmer faded and the stars returned to normal. The water calmed immediately, as if nothing had ever happened. My coffee had gone cold. I sat frozen, unsure whether to move. Eventually, I packed up and walked back to my car, ears straining, hands slightly shaking. The forest came alive again with normal sounds. Crickets, a distant owl, but the lake behind me stayed dark and still. Driving back to Spokane, I kept checking the rearview mirror. Just the road stretching through darkness. The radio crackled on, starting with low static, then clearing. Nothing unusual. At home, I checked weather radar and lake reports. No bioluminescence, no unusual activity, nothing to explain what I'd seen. Even now, I can't explain it. I've told a few friends, but most just shrugged. I don't know if I'll return to that spot, especially not at night, but that sphere rising silently from the water, those perfect impossible ripples. They haunt me still. The clicking came again. 2 quick taps, evenly spaced. I sat up and listened, alert. Something sounded like someone testing a latch on the neighbor's shed. June, my tabby, pressed against my chest, her eyes 2 tiny moons in the dark. She didn't move or hiss, just stayed still and tense. Her reaction told me everything I needed to know. I pulled the blinds aside, just an inch. The street looked almost empty. A few parked cars, a street lamp casting its usual sodium orange glow, Mrs. Money low, Mrs. Dead waved, Duval's maple silhouetted at the corner. But something was different. A pale light hung suspended in the air, about 8 feet above the asphalt, 30 feet from the sidewalk. This wasn't a street light or porch light, it was softer, like a phone screen held at arm's length, bluish-white, with no obvious source. For a moment I thought someone might be balancing a lantern, but there was no movement, no hand, no cord. The light just hovered, motionless. Then it pulsed, dim, bright, dim. The porch light across the street answered in the same rhythm, like a slow breath. I watched my own porch light and saw the filament inside the bulb dimming in sync with the strange glow. Something, muscle memory or foolish courage, made me move. I unthrottled the deadbolt and cracked the door, letting the screen push against the chain. The glow didn't react. Instead, it slid sideways gently and drifted behind the neighbor's house, vanishing as easily as a turned page. At that exact moment, my porch light steadied. The pulsing stopped, like a switch snapping back into place. Everything felt centered, focused on that single motion. I left the door chained and walked to the sidewalk. The air had grown colder, a tight, clean cold that settled in my lungs. Wet asphalt and the lingering scent of fish dinner hung in the air. The silence felt tangible, pressing against my eardrums. From the sidewalk I searched for evidence where the light had been. Nothing, no mark, no smoke, no pavement reflector, just a darker patch between two shadows. When I looked up, the sky was filled with stars. No drones, no planes, just endless, silent darkness. I turned every light on in the living room, flooding the space with harsh illumination. Not because I thought it would do anything, but because darkness felt like an invitation to something unknown. The house looked ordinary: books on the shelf, 2 mugs in the sink, the calendar still showing the month. Nothing seemed altered. June stayed clamped to my lap like she was part of me. I wanted to tell someone, opened my phone, and thumbed at messages before realizing my cellular bars were gone. Not just weak, completely absent. The time remained fixed at 2 or 3 a.m., though minutes continued to tick forward. In the kitchen, the landline offered only dead air, the kind of silence that suggests either a technical failure or an intentional quiet. My cheap radio, typically used for late-night storm listening, produced a thin hiss where music should be. Flipping through stations yielded nothing but the same hiss, then sudden silence. Earlier, I had stood outside, watching aircraft lights and the heavy presence of the maple tree. I waited for some return of sound clicking, hushing, but the night offered only my own breathing and a distant AC unit's hum. Back inside, the door's lock made a small clack that suddenly seemed thunderous. The memory of the window's click lingered, a precise mechanical sound like a metronome. It occurred to me that whatever was out there had known I was awake. More than that, it had known exactly where I could see it. That feeling lodged itself behind my ribs, refusing to leave. I tried to make the night ordinary by repeating the same paragraph 3 times until my eyes blurred. The clock by the TV read 2:26. The house settled with typical creaks, pipes shifting, wood contracting, yet I found myself constantly checking the window, tilting my head to the street, like someone watching a pot, unsure if it's about to boil. Around 3:10 a.m., the metallic clicking returned. This time, it came from the eaves above the driveway, a rapid staccato, like 2 metal spoons tapping together. June bolted from my lap, running to the hallway and pressing herself against the wall. I leaned against the back door, watching the backyard through the screen. My dog June pressed her nose close to the mesh, sensing something I couldn't see. The motion sensor light above flickered briefly, one quick flash, then darkness. Just my compost bin and the honeysuckle sitting motionless in the yard. Everything seemed unnaturally still. Neighbors' windows were shuttered, and the entire block appeared to be sleeping. The strange clicking sound had stopped, and the porch light now burned steadily. The world seemed to collapse in on itself, quiet and compressed. When morning arrived, I remained on the couch until sunlight crept through the blinds. The house felt different, like after a heavy rain, clean but subtly altered. Edges seemed sharper. I walked the yard, searching for any sign of what had happened overnight. I checked everywhere: the maple's trunk, the sidewalk, the narrow strip of lawn between my house and street. Nothing. No marks, no evidence. The only peculiar thing was a small circular patch on the pavement that looked slightly cleaner, as if someone had wiped it. An oil drip, maybe. Or a spot where car headlights might have rested, but it sat oddly in the middle of the road where no vehicle had parked. I photographed the spot, not because I expected proof, but because the act made me feel like I was doing something tangible. The day unfolded normally. Neighbors went to work. Kids boarded school buses. The corner store's barista still overdid the sugar in my latte. No one mentioned the strange glow from 2 a.m. Not that I expected they would. You don't share experiences that might make people think you're seeing things others can't. I half hoped for a new story about a strange light in the suburbs, but nothing surfaced. At night, I'd catch myself staring at the window. Before I could contemplate going outside again, I'd close the blinds. I'd secure the door chain and leave the hall light burning. June would sleep at the bed's edge, opening one eye when I moved, then returning to her dreams. A few nights later, the porch light flickered inexplicably. I convinced myself it was just a faulty bulb and replaced it, but something lingered, a sense that something had been there, just beyond perception. As night enveloped the highway between Twin Falls and Jackpot, I was driving back to Boise after visiting an old friend in Nevada. It was past midnight, with a clear, moonless sky and the vast desert stretching endlessly around me. Traffic was sparse, the same few vehicles repeating their dance across the empty road. A dark blue Chevy Silverado kept leapfrogging me, a red Corolla with a missing hubcap trailing ahead, and a couple of semis in the distance. Around 12:45, I glanced at the clock, the radio playing softly to keep me awake. Suddenly, my headlights dimmed, not flickered, but dulled as if someone had placed a tinted filter over them. The dashboard lights followed suit. The engine stuttered low, like a car about to stall in first gear. I might have dismissed it as fatigue, but then I noticed the red Corolla ahead slowing down and drifting to the shoulder. The Silverado's brake lights flickered and faded, as if the truck were losing power. Back home, life gradually returned to normal. Days settled into their familiar rhythms, a clogged sink, a missed delivery. Yet every metallic sound in the house made me flinch, like someone haunted by a remembered gunshot. Walking from my car to the front door in darkness, I'd pause at the curb, scanning the street. I'd wait for a bluish pinprick to appear, hoping the porch lights would pulse in sync. The street always remained quiet and ordinary. Once, Mrs. Duval's porch light momentarily dimmed, and I swear my heart skipped a beat, anticipating something more. I learned to lock the door twice when the house felt too still, to avoid lingering in those small hours. I'd wash mugs until my reflection was clear, then sleep with the blanket pulled to my chin. The clicking sound from that night lived in my memory, like a loose coin in a pocket, something felt but never fully grasped. An absence that was also a presence. My engine died. Suddenly, everything went dark. No radio, no headlights, nothing. The road vanished, swallowed by pitch-black darkness in an instant. Gravel crunched under my tires as I steered to the shoulder, gripping the wheel and waiting for the engine to restart. I tried the key. Nothing. No click, no turnover. That's when I saw it. Suspended about 150 feet above the highway, a strange shape hung in the clear sky. Not quite solid, not completely formless. A pale oval glowing softly, pinned motionless against the starry backdrop. It didn't move or pulse or make a sound. I stepped out of the car. The desert was eerily silent. No crickets, no wind, just the soft crunch of my boots on gravel. Other drivers were emerging too. The Corolla driver leaned against his door, staring upward. A tall guy in a baseball cap stood in the middle of the road, arms crossed, trying to look calm. A semi had stopped farther back, its driver sweeping a flashlight beam around the cab. Nobody spoke. We all just stared at this thing. I kept waiting for a sound, an engine noise, anything, but there was only silence. The longer I looked, the harder it became to define its shape, sometimes circular, sometimes stretching and shifting when I wasn't looking directly at it. Time became meaningless. 30 seconds or 10 minutes, I couldn't tell. Then the oval began to move. Slowly, smoothly, it drifted westward over the desert. Still silent, still faintly glowing. We watched it slip away until it was just a dim smudge against the stars, then vanished. The moment it disappeared, everything burst back to life. My headlights snapped on. The radio blared. The Corolla's tail lights lit up. The Silverado's engine rumbled. It was like every vehicle had been waiting for the same signal. The guy in the baseball cap muttered something unintelligible, got back in his truck, and pulled onto the road. I was hiking alone at that late September weekend. The weather was already cooling off, with patches of yellow aspens scattered through darker evergreens. I'd driven out from Salt Lake early that morning, planning a quick overnight trip to clear my head before the work week. The forecast promised clear skies and mild temperatures, highs in the 60s during the day, dipping close to freezing at night. I stuck to the trail most of the afternoon, but just before sunset, I wandered off onto a game path leading toward a ridge overlooking a small basin. I wanted to find a spot with a good view to eat dinner and watch the stars emerge. The terrain wasn't technical, just some scrambling over loose rock and dry pine needles, but it left me breathing hard by the time I reached a flat shelf about halfway up. I dropped my pack, and pulled out a thermos of coffee, setting my compass on a nearby boulder to double-check the ridge's direction. The goal was to orient myself and note the trail's location in case the light faded faster than expected. That's when things got strange. The compass needle started to spin. At first, it was just a slight twitch, maybe the boulder's metal was interfering, but then it kept turning. Slow, wobbly circles that couldn't seem to settle. I picked it up, thinking it might be near something magnetic. Even in my hand, the needle drifted aimlessly, shifting direction without finding north. I remember laughing, convinced it was broken. I tapped the glass with my finger. The needle jumped, spun again, and whipped in full circles as if completely disoriented. I crouched there for maybe a minute, just staring. Nothing happened. The Corolla followed. The semi behind me roared back to life. Nobody waved, nobody talked. Everyone just drove off. I sat there a minute longer, letting my hands stop shaking before pulling back onto the highway. The strangest part was how normal the drive felt afterward. No more flickering, no more stalling, just empty road and stars above. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see that glow again. But the sky stayed clear. When I got home, I realized I couldn't account for the lost time. The trip should have put me back in Boise around 3, but I didn't walk through my door until after 4:30. I've never encountered anything like it since. The ridgeline stretched ahead of me, maybe a quarter-mile away, when a light caught my eye. White at first, but with faint green edges that became visible if I stared too long. It hung motionless in the sky, unlike any aircraft I'd seen before. The forest had gone completely silent. No breeze rustled the aspens, and my breathing suddenly seemed deafening. I checked my compass. The needle now rested perfectly north, as if nothing unusual had happened. When I looked up again, the light remained. I tried convincing myself it was a helicopter, but something was off. No rotors hummed, and it didn't tilt or shift like helicopters do. Instead, it slid sideways with an unnervingly smooth motion, covering maybe 2 tree lengths before stopping again. My legs went weak, and I sat heavily on a nearby boulder. The time was 6:47 p.m. I decided to document what I was seeing and pulled out my phone to take a picture. No service, but the camera might work. When I raised the phone, the screen turned a solid gray. No landscape, no light, just a blank, foggy square. Each time I lowered the phone, the light was still there. Each time I raised it, only gray. A chill ran through me, and I quickly packed up my gear. I stuffed the compass into my jacket pocket, slung my bag over my shoulder, and started back toward the main trail. I kept glancing behind me. The light remained fixed above the ridge, seeming to wait. As dusk settled in, shadows stretched long across the ground, and an unexpected coldness crept into the air. I walked quickly, almost jogging, checking over my shoulder with each rise in the path. The light stayed visible above the trees until the path curved and the ridge blocked my view. The moment it disappeared, the forest sounds rushed back. A raven's call, wind-shifted branches, the distant murmur of the stream I'd crossed earlier. Everything returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. The night was damp, one of those late September evenings where salt-soaked wooden boards creaked beneath me and mist hung low over the bay. I was sitting at the pier's end, fishing rod in hand, watching the horizon more intently than my bobber. The tide had been slack for an hour with hardly any bite, but I wasn't rushing. These nights were about quiet as much as catching anything. Around 9:30, the moon began to rise. First, just a pale haze on the horizon, then a round edge pushing through the mist. It looked bigger than usual, like those supermoons people always photograph. As I leaned back on the bench, watching it climb, a wide silver path shimmered across the water with each tiny ripple. Then something strange happened. Another glow started rising just beside the moon. I thought I was seeing double at first, rubbing my eyes and blinking, even switching my fishing rod to the other hand to make sure. But the second glow kept growing, and soon another round edge appeared, smaller yet identical. The second moon. "No way," I muttered, though no one was around to hear. The smaller moon hung perfectly level with the real one. It wasn't a hazy reflection, but crisp and sharp, as if someone had simply copied and pasted another moon right next to the original. Even the water's reflection seemed off. The real moon stretched a long trail across the bay, while this second moon cast no reflection at all. Driving home late one night after a hike, I realized something was wrong. The trek should have taken 5 hours total, 3 hours in and 2 hours out. But when I checked my car's clock, it was past 1 a.m. I couldn't remember sitting on the ridge for more than 20 minutes. In the morning, everything seemed normal. My compass worked fine. My phone camera worked fine. I even took a daylight picture of the same ridge with no issues. But I haven't been back to that basin since. The bay felt wrong that night. Everything seemed muted. The water had a dull heaviness, like it was waiting. The gulls that usually cried from the pilings were silent, and even the waves against the pier sounded hushed. I sat on the bench, hands sweaty on my rod's cork handle, watching something strange happen in the sky. A smaller moon, if you could call it that, started to wobble. Not like clouds drifting, not like heat shimmer. It moved like a coin suspended at the end of a string, shifting subtly side to side. After a few minutes, it began climbing rapidly, way faster than the real moon. Its path was straight and deliberate, as if something had suddenly decided to stop pretending. It cut through the mist, rising until it hit a layer of low clouds. For a brief moment, the glow illuminated the cloud's underside like a lantern pressed against fabric, and then it vanished. The actual moon remained steady, unchanged, as if nothing unusual had occurred. I kept my eyes fixed on the clouds where the smaller moon had disappeared. Occasionally, I thought I saw a faint white glow shifting behind them, though the mist made it hard to be certain. When I finally reeled in my fishing lines, the bobber hung motionless. Each time I nearly convinced myself nothing was happening, another faint pulse of light would emerge from the cloud cover like something was moving around up there. The damp began seeping into my clothes. As I prepared to leave, the wooden pier beneath me vibrated, a steady tremor, almost like an engine humming from deep below. It stopped the moment I noticed. Walking back, I kept glancing over my shoulder. The moon continued its slow, steady climb, but something felt off about the sky. When I reached the shore, I discovered my watch was 9 minutes behind the phone in my pocket, something that had never happened before. At home, I tried to rationalize it as an optical illusion, perhaps caused by mist refracting light. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. The reflection, the movement, nothing fit together logically. For several nights afterward, I found myself making excuses, trying to understand what I'd witnessed. I kept walking down to the pier late, even when fishing wasn't on my mind. The moon would rise, looking ordinary, but I couldn't help scanning the sky. Each time a cloud drifted across its surface, I'd find myself waiting, hoping another disk might emerge alongside it. One night in early October, everything was dead calm. Around 10, a pale light flashed behind the horizon's cloud bank, quick and sharp, nothing like lightning. It appeared in the same spot where I'd previously seen the second moon. No follow-up occurred, but I stood at the pier's edge for half an hour, listening intently before heading back. Though I never saw that second moon again, something always draws my gaze when the real moon climbs over the bay. My eyes drift to the right edge of the horizon, watching, waiting to see if something else might rise with it. I pulled into the gravel drive, easing the van into park and killing the engine. The world went quiet, just like when you stop a lawnmower and suddenly notice the silence. Late summer heat radiated from the road, while the air around the trees felt cooler. The farmhouse sat back from the road, nestled under maple trees. Porch lamps glowed, and a single floodlight illuminated the barn. This was a new route for me. The GPS had routed me down an unfamiliar cut with more potholes than promised. My scanner chirped the delivery ID as I thumbed open the rear doors. The moment I stepped out, something strange began. A porch light flickered. Bright, dim, bright, as if someone were tapping the switch. I assumed it was a faulty bulb and planned to ring the bell quickly. But then the barn light started the same rhythmic dance, followed by the mailbox lantern. It looked ridiculously choreographed. Porch, barn, mailbox, porch again. Each light wobbled like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. Farm smells of cut hay and gasoline hung in the air, but the lights made everything feel off-kilter. Package slung over my shoulder. I walked up the cracked concrete path. The house remained dark. Kitchen curtains drawn, no television glow seeping out. A big brindle dog stood at the fence, typical farm guardian, barking aggressively. Suddenly, when I was 7 feet from the gate, the dog's bark stopped completely, as if someone had abruptly silenced it. The unexpected quiet made me instinctively check the radio. The scanner in my cab, usually alive with dispatch chatter, went silent. No static, no signal. My phone, clinging to 2 bars throughout the route, suddenly dropped to 0. The van's clock blinked weirdly, shifting from 9:17 to 9:14 before resetting. These small, strange occurrences began to stack up in my mind, demanding some rational explanation. I knocked on the door. No response. The package, a bundle of tarp and replacement parts, was heavy, and I was thankful I'd parked close. When I stepped back toward the mailbox, everything abruptly normalized. The porch light blazed fully, the barn flood illuminated like midday, and the mailbox lamp steadied. The dog resumed barking, and my scanner crackled back to life as if nothing had interrupted it. I rationalized the moment as a power surge, old wiring, a load issue, and chuckled at myself for reflexively glancing skyward, but I hadn't been looking up before. My job was simple: deliver or leave a slip if no one answered, then move to the next stop before the late window closed. Yet when the lights stabilized, an undefined unease touched my shoulder. I looked toward the usual band of dark clouds behind the barn and noticed something unusual. A pale glow was moving with an unnatural, deliberate slowness across the sky. This wasn't like any familiar light. No airplane marker, no headlamp, no street light. It was softer, more whitish blue, drifting in a way that defied mechanical movement. The glow seemed to slide like a bead on a wire, carving a thin ribbon over the treetops. It moved straight and steady, unaffected by wind, not darting like a bird. For a moment I'd hoped it might be something mundane, perhaps a neighbor's porch light angled into the clouds. But the more I watched, the less ordinary it became. Its movement suggested a calm similar to a slow tide. Most unsettling was the complete silence. No hum, no distant helicopter rotor whine. Nothing. The dog at the fence sat down, placing its head over its paws as if following an unspoken command. Years of delivery work had taught me to recognize patterns, to understand how animals behave, but this was different. A routine delivery turned strange. My phone camera failed to capture the moment, the screen flickering with a thin grey smear before closing entirely. I tried again, but the shutter icon spun endlessly, eventually saving only a dark frame with a light smudge. Turning away, I counted under my breath, -345 - and when I looked back, everything had changed. The porch light, barn flood, and mailbox lamp were steady, but the glow had vanished. The sky above the ridge looked unchanged, just a smear of grey clouds. The dog, frustrated at losing its target, started barking at the van again. I left the parcel in its usual spot and taped the delivery notice to the door. My hands felt clammy, keys jangling slightly. Walking back to the van, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting someone to be hiding in the trees with equipment for an elaborate prank. But the tree line was empty, just bare branches. Driving away, I tried to rationalize what happened. Old wiring could explain the lights. Electronics glitch, dogs bark strangely. Yet something kept nagging at me. How everything stopped simultaneously. The radio, phone signal, dogs then resumed as if conducted by an invisible hand. My delivery log showed a peculiar detail. The software timestamp revealed a 2-minute 37-second gap between door open and close commands. I was certain I'd been on the porch for only 20 seconds, undermining my sense of time. At the next stop, near a mailbox stuffed with campaign flyers, another odd occurrence. The streetlight buzzed and went dark momentarily. My dash camera captured a single frame of static at 9:22. Where the sky should have been before returning to normal footage, the kind of minute detail you might dismiss until you can't. On the radio, dispatcher's voice cut through my thoughts, asking a question that hung in the air. I had finished my route and made the last delivery just as the highway lights flickered on. The county road back to the depot was darker than I liked, with long stretches that could eat your tires if you weren't careful. In the cab, the van smelled of fast food and coffee grounds. The dash clock read 950, and a country song I didn't care for hummed on the radio. When I called dispatch, the voice was flat and matter-of-fact. "You good?" they asked, like we were discussing the weather. I said I was fine, and then asked about the flickering lights. "Yeah, we've had calls from a couple places," they responded. Transformer guys reported nothing unusual on their end. At home, I sat at the kitchen table in that post-shift days where problems shrink to the size of dirty dishes. My wife came in from the back porch with groceries. When I mentioned the strange lights, she barely looked up. "Not since the storm last month," she said, setting down the bag. I struggled to explain what I'd seen. The porch that seemed to hiccup, the dog going silent, something pale over the ridge. The more I tried to describe it, the less certain I sounded. She offered the most reasonable explanation. Maybe it's art students doing a projection for the festival. I wanted to tell her about the photo I couldn't take. The scanner that went crazy, the dashcam's single frame of static. Instead, I just nodded and drank too much coffee. The next morning, I checked everything again. The scanner log, the dashcam footage, the static frame was still there. A 2-minute and 37-second gap at the house. In the depot lot, The deputy taking weather reports mentioned something interesting. A farmer near the reservoir said his cows had pressed against the fence, refusing to come back in. His wife swore the animals were acting strange. Hank at the garage had been watching something too. Drivers around the county line had seen weird skylights. 2 others talked about a bright, slow-moving something over the reservoir earlier that evening, though they quickly changed the subject to traffic. Nobody asked more than the polite minimum. A late summer night, clear and warm, with the window cracked open, letting in the scent of cut alfalfa from nearby fields. I was driving home from a late shift at the plant, eyes heavy and unfocused, following the 2-lane highway that winds between small towns. Just my headlights and the sky, with the radio providing background noise, a late-night talk show I was only half listening to while counting mile markers. About 30 minutes into the stretch where the trees close in and the road narrows, something strange happened. The radio signal dropped into static and began scanning, but not in the usual way. It skimmed through stations rapidly, like a thumb pressing buttons too quickly. FM, AM, hiss. Fragments of voices and languages I couldn't recognize, more static. Months later, a webcam clip from a feed store down the road showed something odd. A pale streak across the sky. Everyone had a version, but nobody had proof. The county never declared an emergency. We just kept working, replacing a bad transformer on the east line and filing the footage under anomalous artifact. The route resumed its simple rhythm. Maps, packages, signatures. I stopped standing in the road, staring at the tree line. That first night lingered somewhere behind my chest like a loose tooth, sometimes waking me with memories of how the porch light had breathed, its glow crawling slow and exact across the clouds. I ran the dashcam footage through a filter once, getting a smear where the pale thing had been, and software errors that could mean anything. And when I drive past that house, everything looks normal. Porch light steady, barn light obedient, mailbox lamp dull. The dog at the fence wags like every other dog. I delivered to that road every couple of weeks, always glancing stupidly at the ridge, checking if something wants to be seen. So far, nothing appears, but sometimes, on hot nights, with the hum of the refrigerator and insects thick on the windows, I catch myself listening for that odd heartbeat of light, waiting to see if the night will stop and then start again. I was driving down an empty highway, the night folding dark around me. The truck hummed along, steady and normal, but something was off with the radio. It jumped and skipped, channels blurring together, like someone was frantically spinning a dial. I hit the scan button to stop it, but the knob clunked under my thumb, and the display flashed a meaningless frequency. Silence fell for a second after I cut the power. Then the scanning started again, even faster. I laughed, a small, surprised sound. This was just a glitch, something you reset or ignore. But I kept hitting the knob, adjusting the volume as if that might help. The sound was strange. Fragments of music, ghostly ads, a foreign announcement, then white noise. A choir echoed like it was recorded through a tin can. A breeze drifted in, bringing the sweet green scent of fields. The dash clock blinked 213, and for a moment, the digital numbers flickered oddly before settling back. When the radio finally stopped scanning, a local country station came through, the DJ talking casually, as if nothing unusual had just happened. A chill ran down my spine. I noticed the right headlight seemed dimmer than the left. Pulling onto the gravel shoulder under a stand of young cottonwoods, I cut the engine. The night was almost black, fields stretching into deeper darkness. Cooling metal ticked softly. Then the radio started scanning again, but the engine was off. The sound became something alive, sharp and quick, impossible to define. I stepped out, walking to the road's edge. Nothing. No distant tractors, no headlights. The highway was completely empty. The cottonwoods stood unnaturally still, even the usual rustle absent. My phone sat on the passenger seat, one bar of signal blinking its useless no-service warning. Looking up, I saw a light above the tree line, maybe 100 yards ahead, hovering about 30 or 40 feet high. The night was quiet, almost too quiet. A soft white light caught my eye, hanging high like a misplaced lantern. But as I watched, it wasn't just a point, it was taking shape. 3 bright points connected with perfect precision, forming a triangle before my brain could even process the geometry. The edges glowed faintly as if someone had traced a light-filled outline in the sky. Motionless, it hovered over the middle of the lane. My mind raced through explanations. Could it be a windshield reflection? Maybe a lost advertising drone? Or a crop duster flying without lights? I squinted and shifted, searching for something familiar. But this was different. No strobe lights, no helicopter blinking, just a steady, deliberate presence blocking out the stars. No engine sound, no rotor noise, just an unnatural silence. I moved closer to the truck, feeling safer beside the vehicle than exposed in the darkness. My skin tingled with that primal sense of being watched from the shadows. The triangle rotated almost imperceptibly, like it was testing its own angle. Its light cut through the shadows under the cottonwoods, sharp as ink, bright enough to carve but not bright enough to hurt. The truck's radio began to skitter despite being off. Frequencies flickered faster than I could track. For a moment, the DJ's voice broke through, warped and stretched like words, moving through honey. Then everything, static, music, speech, collapsed into silence. At that exact moment, the triangle dipped slightly on one point and rose straight up. Its ascent was smooth, not like a rocket's sudden burst, but steady as a hand lifting a tiny object against the sky. The edges softened. It became a brighter smudge among the stars, then vanished. Suddenly, the radio flicked back to the country station mid-sentence. The DJ's voice continued precisely where it had been interrupted, as if nothing had happened at all. The night was a long, quiet stretch of road when everything changed. My truck's systems had been glitching, the clock jumping, the radio cutting out, and then suddenly everything snapped back to normal. The right headlight flickered on, steady and clear. I knew people do strange things in isolated places after dark, but something about this felt different. The light had moved with an unsettling deliberateness, and the radio's behavior wasn't random. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was atmospheric refraction, a trick of distance, a small triangle close by, or a massive shape far away. For a long time, I sat in the driver's seat as the truck cooled around me. My heart raced, but not with panic. It was more like the lingering sensation of a dream that refuses to dissipate. I checked my phone. Service had returned, one weak bar flickering to life. Slowly, I restarted the engine. The road unrolled before me like a plain ribbon, night breeze bending field plants away from the shoulder. Stars hung exactly where they should be. But something had shifted. I didn't tell anyone that week. No newspaper reported strange lights. No traffic updates mentioned anything unusual. At work, conversations drifted to mundane topics. Quotas, coffee, everyday chatter. Yet the night's oddness remained with me, a persistent sensation like a pebble lodged in a shoe. In the weeks that followed, I found myself driving that same stretch repeatedly, eyes scanning the tree line, moving slower than necessary. Most times only sky and distant plane lights greeted me. About a month later, I glimpsed 3 aligned points of light just past a bend, but a pickup's headlights quickly replaced the vision. Life resumed its small, predictable rhythms. Work, meals, my neighbor's dog waiting under the porch. Yet something lingered. Now, when the truck radio skims between stations, I no longer frantically search for clarity. Instead, I let the song play, and for a moment, the night opens into that suspended space where silence waits to speak. The night pressed down, heavy and unnaturally quiet. A deep, persistent vibration jolted me awake, making the window panes tremble. My clock read 2:41 a.m. Something felt off. Outside, the pine trees beyond my backyard thrashed wildly, yet no breeze stirred the air. The stillness was eerie, the night smelling of warm earth. The sound was precise, a single, unbroken note that resonated through the bed frame and into my chest. It lasted about 20 seconds before subtly shifting pitch, like a finger tracing a glass rim, then abruptly vanished. Complete silence followed, not peaceful but artificial, as if the world had been paused. The trees continued moving despite the absolute calm, swaying for nearly a minute after the sound disappeared. No crickets chirped. No frogs croaked. Nothing broke the unnatural quiet. Downstairs, I stepped onto the porch. Gravel crunched beneath my feet, the only sound. Even the small creek seemed muted, like a faucet barely running. June, my dog, remained motionless under the kitchen table, head resting on her paws. Then the humming returned, softer this time, more vibration than sound. The porch door's glass buzzed against its frame. My teeth seemed to resonate with the frequency. The trees swayed in that same strange, pulsing motion, not wind-driven, but something else entirely. I scanned the sky, expecting a helicopter or plane, but saw nothing. No lights, no movement. Phone in hand, I wandered into the yard, reluctant to look away from the trees. The humming sustained itself for what felt like a full minute before jumping to a higher pitch that constricted my chest. Then once more, silence descended, absolute and unsettling. The silence was overwhelming, like the world was suspended in a single breathless moment. I was certain something was watching me, Even though the yard appeared empty and the tree line dark, something felt different. Not animal-like, but something else entirely. June had crawled completely under the table, pressed flat to the floor, and let out a low whine when I shut and locked the door. Sleep was impossible that night. I stayed in the living room, lamp on, listening intently. Around 4 a.m., strange sounds emerged from the woods, not loud cracking, but deliberate, careful snaps spaced apart, as if something was moving methodically through the trees. I peeked through the curtains, seeing nothing. Yet the snapping continued until sunrise, when the sound abruptly stopped and birds began chirping cautiously. When morning came, I went outside expecting storm damage. Instead, everything looked normal. Trees stood undisturbed, no broken branches or yard debris, dew-wet grass remained untouched. But the dirt near the tree line told a different story, loose and disturbed, with strange, shallow, oval impressions pressed in an inexplicable pattern. These marks weren't deep like human footprints, nor round like deer tracks, just flat and wide in uneven intervals. Something compelled me not to photograph the scene. I just wanted to retreat inside, feeling inexplicably exhausted and disoriented, as if I hadn't slept in days. Even the house's electronics seemed affected. My kitchen clock ran 5 minutes behind the living room clock, something that had never happened before. My phone glitched when opening the weather app, freezing for 10 seconds before updating. The next night, I kept the blinds tightly shut. Around 2 a.m., I awoke to that same heavy, staged silence. Holding completely still, I waited. No humming returned, but the silence persisted for nearly 30 minutes before crickets gradually resumed their nightly chorus. Since that night, something has changed. Most evenings remain normal. Typical sounds of bugs and frogs. But occasionally I'll wake to an unsettling stillness. The house feels too quiet, the air too heavy. I'll check the trees, sensing something undefined but distinct, watching, waiting. The night was already settling into a quiet rhythm when I noticed something off. Late August, perched on a cedar porch of a rental cabin, I was watching the sky with a kind of deliberate emptiness. The ocean breathed warm kelp, and a low fog had draped itself over the point. Behind me, the town had mostly drifted to sleep, just a grocery sign and a distant porch light breaking the darkness. I'd come here to do nothing, and that's exactly what I was doing, until a single point of light started behaving strangely. It wasn't like a blinking plane or a flickering star. This light pulsed slowly, brightening and dimming over 5 or 6 seconds, as if someone was gently adjusting a dimmer. The rest of the sky remained completely still. I couldn't look away. My mind started racing through explanations. A test drone, an unusual pilot route, some trick of the fog. But each theory felt incomplete, leaving gaps I couldn't quite fill. A gull landed silently on the railing and then disappeared. The wind held its breath. Then the light moved, not in an arc or a wobble, but in a perfectly straight line, as if drawn with a ruler. It cut across the sky like a digital cursor, impossibly precise. Stopping dead center between the point and the horizon, it hung suspended, higher than any boy's toy, existing in that liminal space where horizon meets nothing, and then gone. No fade, no scatter, just an abrupt absence, like someone had flipped a switch. The sky where it had been felt strangely hollow. I laughed. A short, strange sound that seemed to dissipate instantly. Afterward, small things felt different. Shifted, rearranged. Something had changed, though I couldn't explain what. The night itself seemed to have been subtly altered, and I was left with an inexplicable sensation of having witnessed something just beyond understanding. The world felt slightly off that night. My old truck's AM radio sputtered and went silent. 2 houses down, the porch light blinked oddly. A nearby street lamp flickered with an uncertain tremor. Walking down the dune path, I noticed strange footprints in the sand. They were too light for a human, not quite animal-like. These prints began near the cliff and ended abruptly at the grass, as if something had decided against crossing the beach. I crouched and traced their outline, feeling the cool sand holding their shape. Instinctively, I took a picture. The timestamp unsettled me. It read 3 minutes and 13 seconds after the moment I remembered the light disappearing. Something felt wrong about the timing. At the tide line, the water sounded normal. Stars dotted the bay's sky, unchanged. No boat lights, no movement. Whatever had left those footprints seemed to have vanished without a trace. A strange sensation of being observed crept over me. Not like an animal watching, but something more deliberate. It felt as if someone had entered a room, looked around, and left a light burning. The post light by the road blinked erratically during my return walk. My truck sat undisturbed, but when I opened the door, a sharp, metallic smell like post-lightning ozone filled the air. My phone showed I'd been gone just 7 minutes. The truck's clock ran slightly slow, and the GPS hesitated to find its signal. A deer appeared on the road, standing unusually still, studying me before walking away without its typical nervous leap. Driving back into town, I noticed a few people out. An old man sweeping near the hardware store, a woman walking her dog, a kid returning from the bus stop. When I mentioned the strange light to the man sweeping, he simply nodded. "Saw something low over the harbor," he said with a dismissive shrug. The woman with the dog shared her own odd experience. Her pet had refused to pass a certain lamppost, trembling for a minute despite nothing being visible. Sleep came fitfully that night. I kept checking through the blinds. Once I heard a fishing boat's engine cut out completely across the bay, then restart after a minute. Its log would later mention only a brief outage. Morning arrived, burning away the night's strangeness. The fog thinned, revealing an ordinary landscape once more. The usual rhythms of life swept in after that night. My phone loaded standard messages, the truck's radio sat exactly where I'd left it, and the tide washed away most traces. Yet something lingered, like dust finding a new corner even after sweeping. Back in the city, I waited for some official explanation. The harbor office confirmed no buoys had been placed or tested. A passing fisherman mentioned a brief flicker and shrugged. A police log contained a cryptic 2-sentence entry from a driver describing something that read more like a half-remembered dream. For weeks, I found myself scanning the sky at odd hours. Sometimes everything appeared normal. Twice more, I witnessed something similar to that first night, a single point pulsing slowly, moving in an exact straight line, then vanishing as if someone had flipped a switch. The motions were small and precise. Once, a point crossed directly over a low ridge, and a faint blink responded from a previously empty valley. Another time, a cluster of lights drifted low over the harbor mouth before folding away with remarkable exactness. Life continued its usual rhythm around me. My neighbor's kid learned to ride a bike. The corner store replaced a broken window. The ferry adjusted its seasonal schedule. Colleagues joked about glitches and ghosts. I chose not to make a big deal of it. The town had always tolerated small oddities. An appliance failing, a dog refusing a porch, a block experiencing a brief power outage. This was how the world handled such things. Little holes opening and other small mysteries slipping through. I eventually visited the harbor office in person. The woman behind the counter met me with polite detachment, the look reserved for someone who is part embarrassed and part sincere. She checked logbooks and sticky notes, ultimately confirming nothing unusual had occurred. Each explanation I constructed took some pieces but left others exposed. If it had been simple, it would have remained simple, but it didn't. The radar blip seemed unremarkable when my colleague first mentioned it during routine tests. She spoke quietly about possible electrical interference, her tone suggesting she didn't expect a deeper explanation. Nights later, I borrowed binoculars from the hardware store and settled at the harbor point. Cold wind swept around me as fog rolled in and out. A small, steady glow rose from the water, pulsing slowly, hanging motionless. Through the lenses it appeared as a thin, precise disk of light against the sky. Utterly still, its movements were unnervingly exact. When it moved, the motion was clean. When it stopped, it was like someone had pressed pause. When it vanished, the space emptied instantly, as if nothing had ever been there. Over subsequent weeks, strange occurrences were subtle and disconnected. A bakery clock ran slightly fast before correcting itself. A neighbor's wall clock froze for an hour, then resumed. Street cameras captured momentary static. An online weather cam showed a single bright point amid stars, which disappeared in the next frame. These incidents didn't form a coherent pattern. They hovered between notable and ordinary, like whispers just beyond understanding. Yet on certain nights, walking home with salt heavy in the air, I'd pause and watch. Some evening stars behaved perfectly, the world feeling orderly and predictable. Other nights, a light would breathe on the horizon, slice across the sky in a razor-straight line, pause without warning, then extinguish as precisely as if switched off by an unseen hand. It was an early spring evening when I found myself jogging later than usual after a long shop shift. The air remained cold enough to fog my breath, but the ground had thawed, releasing earthy scents of wet dirt and pine. My trail wound through wooded areas behind a subdivision, then opened into a long field before looping back toward town. Absolute silence surrounded me, only the sound of my shoes on packed gravel, no cars, no barking dogs. The forest was silent, Nothing but the rhythm of my own breathing and cold ears tucked beneath headphones with no music playing. Something caught my attention as I broke through the tree line into the open field. 3 lights hung perfectly aligned above the opposite tree line. They weren't moving like aircraft in formation. White and steady, they remained motionless, equidistant, and uniform in size and brightness. My jog slowed unconsciously as I watched them. For maybe 20 seconds they remained suspended. Then, abruptly, the entire line rotated 90 degrees, not like planes banking, but as if fixed to an invisible rod spinning smoothly. They rotated back moments later, slower this time, almost methodically. No sound accompanied their movement. The night was so quiet that even a distant branch snap would have been audible. Such bright, high objects moving silently didn't make sense. Standing midfield with cooling sweat on my back, I watched the lights shift and tilt, adjusting their position subtly. Suddenly they shot straight upward, no gradual acceleration, just an instantaneous leap beyond visibility. Vanishing like a film cut between frames, an eerie emptiness settled over the field. Something felt fundamentally wrong with the space around me, like walking into a room moments after someone has left. My ears rang in the profound silence. Less than 3 minutes had passed, though it felt much longer. Returning to the wooded trail, I noticed an unnatural stillness. No crickets chirped, no owls called. Even the wind had disappeared. Each step felt increasingly difficult, the air growing heavier. A fleeting white glow flickered briefly between the branches off the trail, gone before I could fully register it. I quickened my pace, eager to leave this strange, silent landscape behind. I was making tea when I noticed the porch light acting strange. The glow usually spills into the kitchen window, but that night it wasn't steady. Instead, it was dimming and brightening in a slow, almost steady rhythm, like somebody was twisting a dimmer switch back and forth. Only I don't have a dimmer switch, just a regular on-off bulb. At first, I thought maybe it was loose. Sometimes the wind rattles the fixture, and the bulb will blink out if it's not screwed in all the way. But this wasn't flickering. It was deliberate. Dim, bright, dim, bright. Each cycle lasted maybe 2 seconds, like it was breathing. I set the mug down and stepped into the front hall. The light still pulsed through the frosted glass in the door. I unlocked it and leaned out, expecting maybe to see the bulb about to go or some weird wiring issue. Instead, I saw this thing above the street. It looked like a ball of light just hanging there, maybe 20 feet off the ground, almost centered above the asphalt. It wasn't blinding, but bright enough that I could see it glowing against the night air. Not a street lamp glow, not yellow or white, but kind of a soft bluish tint like the color of a TV screen when the signal cuts out. I froze with the door half open, my bare feet on the threshold. The orb just hovered. When I got home that night after my run, the edge of something strange still clung to me. At the trail's edge, the normal sounds came rushing back. Cars on the distant highway, a dog barking, somebody's TV muffled through an open window. It was like stepping from one world back into another. I ran the last stretch home faster than I usually would, heart pounding. Not because of the workout, but because I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still above me, watching. My faux clock was 2 minutes behind the microwave clock in the kitchen. Both had always been synced before. I don't know if that meant anything. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those 3 lights in a perfect line, rotating as if they were one solid thing. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else on that trail saw them, but no one has ever mentioned it, and I haven't asked. Now, whenever I jog that route, I can't help looking up at the tree line when I come out of the woods. Most nights, it's just sky and stars, but I keep half expecting to see those 3 lights again, waiting in formation. Dead still, the porch light kept pulsing behind me, dimming when the orb brightened and brightening when the orb dimmed, as if they were somehow connected. A weird pressure filled my chest, not painful, just heavy, like standing at the bottom of a swimming pool. Across the street, no one was outside. Most houses were dark, with only a few living room lamps glowing softly. Absolute silence surrounded me. No cars, no dogs, just the hum of the porch light and that glowing ball. Then it started to move. Not dramatically or quickly, but drifting slow and steady. It glided down the street without a sound, moving like a weightless balloon on a windless night, straight and level with no string, no swaying. Without thinking, I stepped onto the porch, my hands cold. The orb floated maybe 30 feet farther, angled slightly left, and slid behind my neighbor's house, vanishing completely. Instantly, the porch light snapped back to a steady, solid glow. No more pulsing. I stood listening, expecting something, maybe footsteps or a car engine starting. Instead, pure silence. I considered going inside and locking the door, but stayed put, watching my neighbor's yard. Their house was dark, both cars parked in the driveway. No signs of life. The orb hadn't emerged from the other side. I waited, arms wrapped around myself, counting seconds. 2 minutes passed, then 5. Nothing. Finally, I decided to check the bulb, just to confirm I wasn't losing my mind. I reached up and touched it, hot as normal. The fixture was solid, no loose wires, no buzzing. That should have sent me inside, but I couldn't shake the image of that light slipping behind the neighbor's house. So I went in, grabbed my sneakers, and came out again, this time heading down the steps. The air felt heavier as I approached the street. Not windy, but thick somehow, pressing against me. My skin prickled with static electricity. At the curb, I slowed and stood looking toward the backyard where the orb had disappeared. Nothing. Just the house's shadow and treetops behind it. I pulled into the Sinclair station off Route 40 just after 9 at night. The ground was still wet from earlier rain, black top reflecting overhead lamps, a damp concrete smell hanging in the air. The station felt almost abandoned. Just one other car parked off to the side, no one at the pumps. I took the first open spot near the middle row and cut the engine. The lot was quiet, nothing but the buzzing of overhead lights and the refrigerator hum from inside the store. I stepped out and swiped my card at the pump. That's when things got strange. The screen flickered like an old TV losing signal. Not a typical card declined glitch, but pure static black and white snow filling the small rectangle. I frowned and noticed something else. Every pump screen had gone the same way. 8 pumps in 2 rows, all glowing with that shifting static light. As I turned in a circle, taking it all in, movement caught my eye above the lamp glare. Something metallic slid across the sky, totally silent. No engine noise, no helicopter chopping, just this smooth silver shape gliding slowly, almost hiding in the station lights. Its edges caught sharp, mirror-like reflections as it passed directly overhead. I couldn't make out a clear shape. It wasn't a plane, too low, too close. Not a balloon either. It didn't bob or drift. It simply moved. Later that week, every time I looked out at the street, I expected to see the bluish glow hanging there, waiting for me to open the door. I thought I heard a faint, high-pitched hum earlier, like electronics whining, but it could have been my imagination. I'd stayed until I couldn't stand, feeling exposed in the middle of the street. Backing up slowly to my porch, I went inside and locked the door this time, though I kept the blinds open. I wanted to see if the light would return. For the next half hour, I stood in the hall, peeking out. The porch light held steady. The street stayed empty. Around 10 o'clock, a car finally drove past, and everything looked normal again. I made the tea I'd abandoned earlier but didn't drink it. I just sat at the kitchen table, staring at the window. When I finally went to bed, I left the porch light on. It never pulsed again. Something caught my eye while I was pumping. It moved with an unnatural stillness, hovering just a couple 100 feet up. The strangest part? Total silence. No sound at all. Not even as much noise as a bird's wing. I blinked hard, rubbing my eyes, wondering if the glare was playing tricks on me. When I looked back, everything seemed normal. Pump screens reset to their standard insert card or pay inside messages. If I hadn't been staring directly at them moments before, I would have thought nothing unusual had occurred. I tilted my head up, scanning the sky. Empty, empty. Whatever I'd seen had vanished completely. I stood frozen, waiting for it to reappear. I even stepped out from under the gas station's canopy, checking the horizon. Nothing but a damp black sky and the distant highway's faint glow surrounded me. Mechanically, I continued fueling. My hand trembled slightly as I swiped my card, constantly glancing upward between each machine. Beep. I surveyed the lot, noticing the other car from earlier had disappeared without a sound. The store seemed abandoned, lights on, but no clerk visible at the counter. I debated going inside, but felt oddly exposed. Something made me certain that stepping away from the pumps would be missing something critical. My eyes kept scanning the sky. A few low clouds hung overhead, but no stars, no planes, just a blank, wet darkness. The pump's sudden click startled me. I hastily replaced the nozzle, not even checking if the tank was full. All I wanted was to be back in my car. Once inside, I locked the doors instinctively. Sitting still, I gripped the steering wheel, watching the canopy lights shimmer on my hood's reflection. The rearview mirror showed only an empty lot behind me. I forced myself to look back at the pumps one final time before pulling away. Every screen glowed normally, as if nothing had happened. Driving down Route 40, I repeatedly checked my mirrors, not for other vehicles, but for the sky above, half expecting to see something silver drifting in the reflection. My radio crackled softly in the background. The night was deep and dark when I boarded the delayed flight from Denver to Seattle. It was mid-January, close to midnight, and the 2-hour postponement had drained everyone's energy. Most passengers were already asleep, headphones in, even before we reached cruising altitude. I settled into my window seat over the wing, a spot I typically avoid during daylight but doesn't matter much at night. Soft reading lamps cast a gentle glow through the dimmed cabin. Outside, only black sky and scattered stars were visible. About 40 minutes into the flight, something caught my eye. Initially, I dismissed it as a wing-like reflection, but it remained fixed even when I moved my head. Pressing closer to the window, I spotted a shape beyond the wing's edge. Not like a typical aircraft, this was different. Darker than the surrounding night sky, it seemed to block out the stars behind it. Sharp, distinctive lines formed an elongated triangular shape, almost like an arrowhead. No blinking lights, no navigation markers, just an inexplicable geometric form keeping perfect pace with our plane. It moved steadily, shifting almost imperceptibly during turbulence, but otherwise locked in position. Surrounding passengers remained oblivious. The woman next to me wore an eye mask. The man between us slept with his head against the tray table. Afterward, the experience haunted me. Every time I fill my gas tank, I find myself scanning the area, half expecting something unexpected. That night, I drove the entire 90-minute journey home on a half tank, avoiding any additional stops. The strange sighting etched into my memory. Down the aisle, 2 teenagers were absorbed in something on a phone. My voice caught in my throat. I wanted to point out what was happening but couldn't. The triangular shape slowly tilted, banking without changing speed or altitude. It rotated, revealing its precise geometry, 3 distinct points with a leading edge longer than its sides. The object seemed massive, far larger than an aircraft wing. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. I kept expecting an announcement from the captain, something about another plane or turbulence. Nothing came. The speakers remained silent. Glancing down the aisle, I'd hoped a flight attendant might pass by, but the cabin was still. Passengers slept, unaware. I felt isolated, the sole witness to something extraordinary. When I looked back, the shape maintained its position alongside the plane. Suddenly it began descending. Not sharply, but in a smooth, controlled glide. It slipped beneath the wing and vanished into the clouds. The moment it disappeared, I realized I'd been holding my breath. My chest ached as I exhaled. I stared into the darkness, expecting its return. The sky remained empty. Moonlight softly illuminated thick clouds below, but nothing moved. Clear stars sparkled overhead. My heart raced. No one around me showed any reaction. Minutes later, the seatbelt sign chimed. The captain's voice was calm and routine. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're passing through a patch of rough air, so please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." No mention of another aircraft. Nothing unusual. The remainder of the flight felt endless. I couldn't relax or close my eyes, constantly scanning the window for any sign of the triangle. When we landed in Seattle, passengers stretched and gathered their belongings, looking completely normal. The flight seemed unremarkable to everyone else. I considered asking the man next to me if he'd witnessed anything, but the words stuck in my throat. Walking through the terminal into the cold night, I carried with me the haunting image of that dark shape, its sharp edges cutting through stars before sliding silently beneath the clouds. We'd been to this campsite many times before, so when we arrived in early September, nothing seemed unusual. Me, my cousin Alex, and 2 work friends, Greg and Michael, drove out to a clearing just off a service road in the Cascades. The weather was perfect, clear, with a slight chill after sunset that made a campfire ideal. We arrived around dusk and quickly set up our routine. 2 tents went up, and we started a fire in our usual rock ring. For a few hours, we cooked hot dogs and chatted. I remember glancing at my watch just before midnight. The fire had burned down to coals and a few weak flames. We were careful pouring water over it and having Greg stir the ashes until they were just a damp grey sludge. With nothing left to do, we went to bed. I fell into a deep sleep initially, but something pulled me awake around 3 o'clock or 4 in the morning. It wasn't a specific sound or movement, just that strange feeling when your brain suddenly becomes alert for no apparent reason. I lay still, listening. The forest was eerily silent. No wind, no crickets, just absolute quiet. Then I noticed a pale shifting light outside the tent. Not firelight, but something different. I thought maybe Alex had restarted the fire and unzipped the tent flap a couple of inches to check. The fire ring wasn't burning with flames, but it was glowing, almost reignited somehow. Thin smoke curled from ashes I knew we'd completely soaked. The glow wasn't the typical orange, but a white flat light, like embers under glass. When I pushed the flap open wider, that's when I saw it. A dim circular light was moving slowly above the tree line, about 100 feet up. It wasn't bright like a spotlight, more like a foggy halo. Completely silent, it glided above the pines in a steady loop, tracing a circle around our campsite. I was frozen, watching and waiting for someone else to wake up, but nobody stirred. I wanted to call out to Alex, but no sound would come. The light continued its circular path, and each time it passed over the fire pit, the coals would pulse brighter, then dim again. It felt deliberate, as if the light and the coals were somehow connected. I finally managed to whisper to Alex, who grunted and rolled over without waking. I tried again, this time calling to Greg in the other tent. Still nothing. The fire pit looked wrong when I stepped out of the tent at sunrise. The ashes had hardened into a perfect ring around the stone's inside edge, as if someone had poured plaster and let it dry. In the middle, only a thin dusting remained, no coals, no wood chunks. None of us had touched it. When I told the others what I'd seen, they were just as puzzled. Greg initially tried joking about sleepwalking, but fell silent after seeing the pit himself. Michael poked it with a stick. Observing it looked sifted like someone had meticulously cleaned it. The strangest part was that nobody remembered hearing or seeing anything during the night. Alex swore he hadn't moved an inch after falling asleep. We broke camp by mid-morning and headed back to the car. Just off the trail, Greg stopped and pointed out something odd. A perfectly round 10-foot circle where pine needles were flattened, with no burn marks or footprints. The drive home was quiet, filled with unspoken questions. Later that evening, I was sitting on the low stone wall behind my building, watching the October sky transform. The horizon shifted from orange to a violet that looked almost painted. It was a moment of calm after a long day at the gallery, an opening night filled with people who claimed to love my work, but who ultimately didn't follow through. My name's Hannah Torres. I live in a 3-flat that backs onto the old quarry, and this ledge is the only spot on my block where you can see the sun disappear without a neon sign interrupting the view. The evening was dry and cold, the kind where your breath fogs briefly before vanishing. I propped my elbows on my knees, holding my phone up to film the light that made the city look like it belonged to no one. Two of my neighbors, Dara and Len, stood nearby. By the stairwell, a casual conversation unfolded about the show. Impressions mixed with critique, whispers about Ben from PR's true intentions hanging in the air. I kept recording, finding silence easier than engagement. Something felt off before the video captured its moment. The rooftop across the alley, usually crowded with pigeons, stood eerily empty. Dara brushed it aside with a casual, "Maybe the hawk finally got its act together." Len remained silent, scanning the sky with an unsettling intensity. The alley carried its familiar scent, gutter and apples, a typical city backdrop, yet the atmosphere felt different. Not peaceful, quiet, but a muted sensation, as if someone had turned down the world's volume. My technology started acting strange. The phone battery, solid at 70% when I left, plummeted to 40% within minutes. That glitchy jump phones sometimes do, ticking down rapidly. My cheap watch from grad school bizarrely rolled back 10 minutes when I glanced at it. Exhaustion or something else. I cracked a joke about missing curfew. Len laughed, but something was off in his tone. "Did you see anything weird?" he asked. I mentioned only my cab driver's navigation struggles. Dara mumbled, "No, nothing," while studying the ground. Then came the sound from the quarry, a methodical metallic tapping. Neither construction nor vehicle noise. 3 precise beats, then silence. No echo. No aftermath. My arms prickled. Dara clutched her bag tighter. Lens, weak, probably a loose pipe, convinced no one. Nobody investigated. We just stood suspended in uncertainty. I aimed the phone over the railing, capturing the horizon. The light shifted rapidly, city outlines sharpening as color transformed the landscape. 40 seconds of urban breathing, soft murmurs. Only later would I notice the shape within the frame. I only noticed it later after watching the clip over and over that night. Around 57 seconds in, a dark blot appears against the bright sky's last band. It's a patch so black it devours the color behind it, at first small, hovering low above the distant ridge where old radio towers stand. Then, in just a frame or two, it slices across the view. The motion is a single hard smear. No trail, no blur. It vanishes at the far corner like a curtain suddenly drawn shut. No sound accompanies this moment, We were talking, and the recording captures our conversation without anyone mentioning or reacting to the strange movement. It seemed to move through a speed beyond human perception. When I paused and rewound, I saw the shape. A black delta, possibly triangular, though that might just be how pixels render extreme motion. Blowing up the frame made my phone screen slippery with my trembling fingers. I asked Dara if she remembered seeing anything. She looked at me like I was making a joke. Len claimed he'd seen a plane making a slow, lazy arc with his hand, insisting he hadn't seen a black thing dart across. My memory of those minutes is hazy. Fragments float, the taste of apple from the alley, the cold, Dara's laughing rhythm, no motion registered in my recollection. We'd watched the raw clip together right then on the stoop, our conversational laughter captured, nothing suggesting we should look up. But on playback, the smear was undeniable. Dara's eyes went to the sky, her frown deepening as she pulled her coat tighter. Len kept repeating, "Shouldn't we have seen that?" As if challenging reality itself. We rewound the same second repeatedly. The smear remained constant, a sudden, precise streak punching through the corner and vanishing. Nobody in the footage changed expression. The dogs on the neighboring rooftop didn't even bark. If I'd been alone, I might have dismissed it as a camera trick. But with two people unable to remember it, a small hollow opened in my confidence. After uploading the clip to a cloud drive while sitting on the steps, I sent the link to a friend who works at the paper. My phone dropped from 40 to 38% during the email, which felt oddly cartoonish. The upload had hesitated momentarily, my phone trembling, as if uncertain whether to comply. We split up after coming inside. Dara went to check on a delivery, Len headed home to water his plants, and I retreated to my flat's kitchenette to make tea. Watching the clip twice more, the smear remained indistinct. I crossed to the window, scanning the exact point in the sky where the shape had appeared earlier. The sky was now a flat navy, the last orange bruise fading. No lights moved. My neighbor, smoking in the alley, looked up when I waved. "Beautiful night," he said, sightseeing. I showed him the clip, and he squinted, remarking, "It must be a small bird." When I asked if he remembered anything from the filming moment, he simply shook his head, took a drag, and went inside. Strange occurrences followed. My apartment stereo, which I never leave on, started playing radio at a low volume. Turning it off, I noticed the display read 12:07 while my phone and hallway clock showed 7:12. The kettle refused to whistle, boiling and cooling with only a faint hissing exhale. Niso, my typically indifferent cat, remained hidden under the bed for an hour, unusually dramatic for her. My inbox suddenly filled with 3 messages from a local forum. Strangers asked if anyone had noticed the light over the quarry. One described a shadow moving incredibly fast, while another dismissed it as a cloud trick. People like Len and Dara would typically try to smooth over such mysteries with jokes and explanations. The next morning, my friend from the paper emailed. She'd shown the clip to colleagues over coffee, initiating what would become a series of curious discussions about that night. 3 of us had been there when something moved in a way that didn't quite register. It darted across the frame, a black smear that defied easy explanation. Astrophysics grad students and drone hobbyists weighed in with polite, uncommitted theories. One suggested a meteor from a low angle, another argued the shape wasn't consistent with meteor movement. The video became an obsession. I watched it until my eyes blurred, replaying the moments where the black thing cut across the screen. My throat would tighten, that uncomfortable feeling you get when something unexpected slides down. The upload gained traction in small internet circles that love strange phenomena. Enhanced footage sparked more debate. Someone claimed to see a beveled edge, while another insisted it was just a digital artifact. Comment threads buzzed with questions. What is it? Where's the rest of the footage? We need a better lens. I started watching horizons differently. Not dramatic sunsets, but that thin line where sky meets roof, where antennas stand like jagged teeth. I'd stand on the wall at odd hours, cigarette in hand, even though I don't smoke, hoping to catch a glimpse again. Sometimes alone, sometimes with Drar or Len, though they lost interest. Len texted once about leaving some things alone. "Some things are just night things," he wrote. The footage remained my only concrete evidence. A smear on my phone, a memory of a night when pigeons vanished and the quarry tapped like a finger on a rail. No official records, no city notes about drones or weather anomalies. While everyone else moved on to TV shows, new roofs and election ads, the mystery lingered. Here's the rewritten version. Late November's cold bit hard, the kind that stings your cheeks with each breath. I'm Caleb Hartman, raised on hunting trails with my uncle, learning to move silently through the wilderness. That morning started like countless others before. A thermos of coffee, a packed sandwich, and my dog Bo curled up in the truck seat. We took the lower trail where deer often roamed. Brittle leaves crunched underfoot, and the creek below the switchback ran low and quiet. Overhead, a thin grey sky threatened snow without ever following through. 20 minutes into the walk, something felt different. The birds vanished, not just quieted, but completely gone. It was like someone had abruptly switched off a radio. Bo stopped dead in his tracks, ears alert and focused on a nearby thicket. He wasn't moving, which was unusual for him. Normally, he'd be the one to break tension with a quick movement or playful nudge. This time, he stood completely still, staring intensely at something I couldn't see. I tried to rationalize the moment. Maybe a hawk was nearby, or the weather was playing tricks. I continued scanning the cut lines and ridge tops, keeping my movements slow and deliberate. Shortly after, another odd occurrence. A high-tension line across the next hollow blinked twice, before settling into a steady state. It was something I couldn't explain or fix. Just another strange detail my brain quietly recorded. The clip drifted across the internet like so many forgotten moments. Sometimes, walking home late with a bare sky above, I'll pause at the corner, phone in hand, hoping to catch a glimpse of that dark shape again. It sits in a folder labeled October, and when I watch that brief second where something smears across the frame, I feel that familiar small hunch, the feeling of witnessing something the world has forgotten. He gave it to me when his legs gave out, telling me, "Carry her careful." The old rifle was a trusted companion, passed down when climbing became too difficult. The cold had fogged the scope. I wiped it clean with my sleeve and checked the rangefinder. A familiar routine. Or so I thought. We found a perfect tree. Its fork felt like a comfortable chair as I settled in. Bee nestled beneath the roots, sleeping that deep dog sleep of absolute trust. The valley seemed peaceful. A farmhouse bell rang 3 slow, deliberate chimes. Then, where the 4th ring should have been, there was nothing. People here use bells for simple signals. Supper, arrivals. The interrupted pattern made me glance at my watch. 5 minutes had slipped away. I tried to shake off the unease, refusing to read meaning into small oddities. The woods grew unnaturally quiet as noon approached. No leaves rustled, the usual scents, wet earth, the musky hint of rotting deer, seemed muted, as if the air had been cleaned. Bo nudged my boot, not anxious, but reluctant to be alone, like a horse sensing another nearby. I stretched and moved down the ridge where the forest opened to a horseshoe-shaped field. Brown grass whispered of last year's hay. That's when I saw them. At first, they looked like lanterns someone might hang for a celebration. Small globes of warm light drifting between branches, not glowworms or flashlights. They moved together, perfectly synchronized, floating like tiny lamps on an invisible string. Soft, intimate glows visible through the needles, like candlelight pressed against thin paper. My body reacted before my mind could. I sat down, seeking cover, watching. The lights wove between tree trunks. Settling as if placed by an unseen hand, Bo rested his head on my knee, silent and still. No barking, no whining, just watching. The silence pressed against me. My watch seemed to tick louder than possible. My thumb brushed the safety, waiting. I raised the Remington to my shoulder, lifting the scope without thinking, a hunter's instinct, a small habitual attention to what's in your hands. For half a second I could see through the lens. 3 or 4 white points of light drifted like slow fireflies, each with a faint halo. They were close enough that the crosshairs divided them, but far enough that taking a shot would have been pointless. I had no intention of firing, not unless something threatening emerged from the trees. The scope has a way of making things real. It brings distance closer, more manageable, removing all possibility of uncertainty. When I centered on one of the lights, they responded, not by flitting like startled birds, but by uncoiling from the trees and rising straight up. No arc, no wobbling climb, just a direct line faster than I could have anticipated, and yet there was no sound, no wind, no motor, no branches cracking. One by one they pierced through the canopy, continuing upward until the pale grey sky swallowed them. For a moment it looked like a string of pearls sliding through a sleeve, which then closed, leaving nothing but the ordinary sky behind. The rifle creaked in my grip from the tension. Bo barked once sharply, then sat back down as if the sound had been accidental. I could feel my pulse in my ears. No thunder, no commotion, Just a blank space where the lights had been. The trees stood untouched. No bending, no burning. The branches showed no signs of disturbance. No scorch marks. No damage. Whatever had passed between the trunks left absolutely no trace. When I climbed down and walked the area where the lights had been most visible, I found nothing. No footprints, no dropped objects, no evidence of human presence. The underbrush remained unchanged, just the usual animal lanes, rabbit runs, and a deer's resting hollow deeper in the woods. The earth bore only the weight of small animals and boots, with no geometric patterns or tool marks. It was as if something ephemeral had been placed in the trees and then removed without a whisper. Most people would have gone home, locked away the rifle, and shared the story with someone who'd laugh and call it superstition. But there's a stubborn streak in men who know the woods. I wanted to understand. I wanted to see if it would return, so I sat by the creek and waited. I watched the line of pines as the afternoon light shifted and softened. Nothing stirred, save for a distant truck's engine that trembled briefly, cut out, then resumed as if seeking some unspoken permission. These small moments accumulated into a sensation of being observed, not threateningly, but with a clinical precision. Later, near the old oak by the road, I encountered my neighbor, Jared Mills. A government mechanic who'd hunted coyotes since childhood, Jared was someone I trusted more than most. When I asked about any unusual occurrences that afternoon, he mentioned dogs barking in the hollow around noon, attributing it to wind-carried scents. My account of the strange lights drew a skeptical look, the kind that suggested I might have been dreaming. "You sure you weren't half asleep, Cal?" he asked, offering a grin that softened the potential criticism. My voice wavered when I described Bo's intense stare. Something unprecedented. Jared didn't push further, simply fixing his truck's tailgate and advising, "Keep an ear out. Call if you see anything else." Sleep eluded me that night. I pondered those lights, present yet absent, leaving no trace. Tiny, precise moments seemed to have preceded them. A bird's sudden silence, an abrupt bell tone. In the following weeks, I shared the story sparingly, with my uncle over coffee, with Jared while checking fence lines, with a chatty feed store employee. Reactions varied. Some nodded, as if mentally checking off potential explanations. Others regarded me with a wariness reserved for unsettling tales. No one offered meaningful insight. No one else had witnessed the lights except Bo and me. And dogs, after all, can't provide testimony. Days passed. Routine consumed extraordinary moments. Thanksgiving approached, and the first real frost crusted the fields. Bo and I still venture out occasionally. Our ritual of scanning the ridge and undergrowth feels almost meditative. I carry my rifle, using its scope to reassure myself that the world can be understood, measured. Most days reveal nothing more than deer and silent trees. Weeks later, under a thick moonlight that carried coal smoke from the valley, something stirred again. Here's the rewritten text. My hands trembled as I put the rifle in the safe after getting home. Bo slept across the truck seat, head on my lap, while warm air from the heater surrounded us. The night drive felt different, weighted with something unresolved. Earlier through my scope, I'd watched a faint light flicker where lanterns once hung, then vanish without explanation. I still can't explain those lights. They don't fit neatly into any rational description. The woods have their own language, sometimes direct, sometimes deceptive. What haunted me wasn't the lights themselves, but how completely the world absorbed their brief existence. Like a whisper that leaves no trace, they appeared and disappeared, challenging everything I thought I understood. Midnight found us pulling into a roadside diner. Pete and I had been hauling machinery across state lines, our eyes blurring against endless white highway lines. The gravel lot held just one old Ford parked at an awkward angle. A buzzing neon sign hung over a squat building with long windows. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed too brightly for the hour. A fan spun near the ceiling, barely moving the stale air. Crumbs littered empty booths, suggesting recent customers had just departed. Behind the counter, a woman in her 40s looked up, her hair pulled back, a smile weary but welcoming. "Evening," she said, reaching for coffee mugs. Pete ordered 2 coffees. The seats squeaked as we settled onto stools. Burnt coffee beans scented the air, sharp and oddly comforting after hours of driving. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. "You boys headed west?" she asked. "Long haul," Pete replied. She leaned over the counter, her eyes shifting between us like she was weighing something unspoken. "Did you see them too?" Her voice was as calm as a summer breeze. He frowned, his brow pulling tight. I asked, "See who?" But she didn't respond. Instead, she offered that same small, knowing smile and disappeared through the swinging kitchen door. It flapped once and fell shut. Pete and I sat in silence, our mugs steaming between us. The clock above the counter ticked softly, steadily. Something felt different. The air seemed to have grown colder, the space emptier. I craned my neck toward the kitchen, listening. No sounds of dishes, no running water, just absolute silence. "Maybe she's making more coffee," Pete muttered, not sounding convinced. We waited. 5 minutes passed. Nothing. Pete tapped his fingers against the counter, then stood and approached the kitchen door. The hinges squeaked as he pushed it open. He stepped inside, vanished for a moment, then returned, shaking his head. "Nobody there," he said. "What do you mean, nobody there?" I pressed. He explained the kitchen was completely empty, cold stoves, no lights, just stacked boxes like the space hadn't been used in weeks. I checked myself. He was right. Dusty shelves, clean swept floor, no traces of recent cooking, but we'd both seen her carry the pot through that door moments ago. Our mugs still sat steaming, filled with fresh, dark coffee. We returned to our seats bewildered. The neon sign buzzed, casting a sickly pink glow across the Pete murmured. I nodded. We finished our coffees in silence, the clock continuing its steady rhythm. The diner seemed to grow quieter, as if holding its breath. When we finally stood to leave, I glanced back at the counter. The mugs remained, but something felt off. Maybe the steam rising too slowly, or the liquid seeming slightly strange. We didn't discuss it then, not that day. The night felt different, thick with a fog that dulled our headlights as we drove along the narrow road outside Plainfield, New Hampshire. Claire sat beside me, and Timmy and Sally dozed in the back seat. I'd traveled this route countless times, but something was off. The atmosphere seemed to stretch and slow, as if the fog was wrapping around us more densely than usual. Rounding a bend, I spotted 2 bright points of light in the distance, perfectly aligned and heading straight toward us. At first, I thought it was another car, but something felt wrong. These lights didn't flicker or bounce like typical headlights. They remained unnervingly steady, level with each other. My instinct was to slow down and pull over, Claire muttered. "Someone's coming," her voice tight with an edge of nervousness. As the lights drew closer, an eerie silence surrounded us. No engine sound, no engine sound, no gravel crunching, just those 2 unwavering spots of brightness fixed on us like unblinking eyes. I eased our Plymouth to the roadside. The kids stirred slightly. Timmy asked if we were stopping for someone, and I assured him we would just be a minute. Then things got strange. The lights didn't pass us like a normal vehicle. Instead, they rose silently from the road, drifting upward in a way that defied logic. Hours later, at a roadside diner, the encounter hung between Pete and me like an unspoken weight. The neon sign flickered as we set down our coffee mugs, creating small ripples. Outside, the highway stretched black and empty. No crickets, no wind, just the sound of our boots on gravel. We climbed back into the truck and pulled away. The neon glow disappeared behind us, swallowed by the night. For a while, we sat in silence. The tires hummed, and our headlights cut through the darkness. Finally, Pete broke the silence. "You think she was asking about lights?" he said. Earlier that evening, I'd noticed something odd low over the fields. A pale glow moving too smoothly to be a plane, too steady for a lantern. I dismissed it then, thinking my eyes were playing tricks after hours of driving. Now, I wasn't so sure. Pete's tight grip on the steering wheel and his intense focus on the road told me he might have seen something too. We didn't stop again that night, and we never returned to that diner. The fog swirled around the car, making it hard to tell which way was up. 2 points of light drifted lazily overhead, almost floating on an invisible current. They moved without any engine noise, defying gravity's usual rules. Claire gasped and pulled her coat tighter. In the back seat, Timmy and Sally sat up, wide-eyed, watching the lights climb higher than the treetops before slowly drifting east and vanishing into the thick forest darkness. My hand remained frozen on the gear shift, unsure if I'd really seen what I thought I'd seen. "Did you see that?" Claire finally asked. I just nodded, unable to speak. We continued driving, slower now. The kids peppered me with questions about what the lights might have been. A plane? A helicopter? I didn't answer, unwilling to describe how strangely those lights had moved. About 15 minutes later, something caught my eye near Cedar Brook Bridge. Between the trees, a movement that didn't match the natural branch sway. A glimpse of a figure, maybe 4 feet tall, standing perfectly still, watching us. "Dad," Sally whispered. "Why is it dark over there?" Nothing, honey, I answered, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. But I couldn't shake the feeling something was moving with us, just beyond sight. The rest of the drive felt strange. Fog pressed against the windows like a living thing. Quick light flickers darted at the edges of my vision. Too bright for stars, too fast for fireflies. I scanned the road for animals but saw nothing. By the time we reached town, the fog thinned. House lights looked normal. The kids had grown quiet. Claire looked pale but was trying to stay calm. I was simply relieved to see street lamps again. I parked and sat for a while, staring at the road disappearing into the trees. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I kept hearing that road in my head, echoing with fog and something lifting silently. When I went outside around midnight to check, the road was empty. Just ice glinting under moonlight and owls calling from the pines. No tracks, no footprints to explain what I'd seen. The next day, I returned to where we'd pulled over. Tire marks from our Plymouth were visible on the gravel, but no sign of any other vehicle. I walked nearly a mile along the roadside, searching for any disturbance. The trees stood untouched. My neighbor hadn't seen anything unusual that night. No strange lights, no reports of missing time. I wondered if I'd imagined it, but I knew I hadn't. Claire had seen it too, and she wasn't someone who jumped at shadows. A week later, driving past the same road, a sense of dread settled in my stomach. The fog was heavier than before, rolling in thick and silent. As I slowed down, a shimmer caught my eye at the edge of the trees, like a reflection or a ripple. My heart raced, but when I looked directly, nothing was there. Two lights rising off the ground, drifting silently into the sky, and that fleeting movement among the trees. I've returned countless times, day and night, in clear weather and fog, but it never happened again. Yet every time I pass that stretch, I feel watched. Some people say I made it up or blame it on fog and headlights, but I know what I saw. The strangest part wasn't any threat or danger, just a presence moving impossibly. I can't explain it, and that's what haunts me. Claire tells me not to dwell on it, that our family is safe, and there's probably a simple explanation. But the image of those two lights lifting and gliding away without sound stays with me. On quiet nights when fog presses against the window, I can almost see them rising beyond the pines. Silent and mysterious. For a long time after that night, something about the road haunted us. What happened doesn't fit neatly into any explanation I can give. The kids never spoke of it again, and Claire avoided driving that route after dark. I understand why. Deep in the woods, sometime past midnight, I woke to a sound that didn't belong. A faint, steady crunching like boots on gravel. But there was no driveway nearby. I was camped in a small clearing, far from the main trail, with nothing but a pale stone ring marking my spot. The sound was too deliberate to be an animal. No pauses, no rustling, just a measured walk. My eyes adjusted to the moonlight filtering through tree branches. The sound drew closer, reaching the clearing's edge. Then I saw it. Not a person, but a faint white glow. This wasn't a bright light, more like a dying flashlight's dim beam. It moved through the trees, weaving behind them but staying visible, as if the light itself was alive. No footsteps, no snapped twigs, just that steady, shifting illumination. It drifted along the clearing's edge, maybe 30 feet away, circling like something was tracking me, not swinging like a lantern, not sweeping like a flashlight, just floating. My mouth went dry. I didn't move. I just watched. Some experiences defy understanding. You can see something clearly and still know it doesn't belong in the world as you know it. All you can do is accept it and keep moving forward. That's exactly what we did. The night was eerily silent. I first noticed something moving sideways, low to the ground, like it was tracking an invisible path. My hand found the tent zipper, and I hesitated. Was someone playing around? I needed to see more, or maybe scare them off. Carefully, I eased the zipper down, wincing at the metallic sound that seemed to echo in the stillness. When I finally opened the flap and peeked out, the glow had vanished. No sound, no movement, just the dark clearing, trees, and cold air against my face. I scanned the tree line, waiting. The silence was complete. No crickets, no rustling leaves, nothing. I pulled the flap closed and sat inside, listening intently. I expected more sounds, more movement, but there was only silence. After what felt like an eternity, I grabbed my flashlight. Its beam cut across the clearing, illuminating everything exactly as I'd left it. Pale stones, fire pit, low grass all untouched. I swept the light toward the trees where I'd seen the glow, but found only trunks and shadows. Walking to the clearing's edge, I searched the ground. No footprints, no disturbed grass. The gravel ring remained pristine. Then I saw it. My backpack, which I'd left under the tent's vestibule, now sat upright in the middle of the clearing. I checked the pack carefully. Straps were buckled, zippers closed. Opening the main compartment revealed everything intact: food, clothes, phone. Nothing missing, nothing added, just moved. Sleep was impossible after that. I sat in the tent, flashlight in my lap, waiting for dawn. When morning came, the clearing looked normal. No signs of disturbance, except the backpack, sitting exactly where I'd found it. I packed up quickly and left, cutting my trip short. At the trail, I didn't look back. Late October offered a crystalline night, the cold carving sharp edges into everything. Marco Reyes stood on a gravel roof, telescope set up, red headlamp tucked away to preserve night vision. He wasn't an astronomer, just someone fascinated by the tiny movements against the vast, empty sky. While tracking the Cassiopeia constellation, his planet tracking app pinged a satellite pass. But this was no ordinary satellite. 4 points of light crawled across the sky, perfectly aligned like an invisible string of LEDs. No drift, no jitter, just an unnervingly smooth mechanical glide. Then something extraordinary happened. The formation split, not scattering like birds, but executing a precise geometric transformation. The points rearranged into a square, then a diamond. One point folded inward at an impossibly sharp angle, as if light itself had suddenly changed direction. The motion was instantaneous, like a page turning. He checked his equipment, tapped the eyepiece. The live phone feed confirmed what he was seeing. This wasn't a hallucination. So he started recording, documenting something that defied explanation. For 3 minutes, the lights performed an impossible dance. They pushed together, snapped apart, slid sideways, without any natural arc. They would vanish and reappear a fraction of a degree away, all without a sound. The surrounding world remained mundane. Distant traffic, a single dog bark, the far-off hum of a plane, but these lights moved with physics that made no sense. Sharp turns that would shred any known aircraft, pauses that weren't pauses but impossible jumps. After 10 minutes, Marco felt simultaneously stupid, small, and hyper-alert. Then the sky returned to normal. An airplane blinked its navigation lights. A satellite traced its predictable path. Everything was ordinary again. The morning after the rooftop night started normally enough. I was heading to my usual shift as the evening reference librarian, a job I've held for 3 years at the downtown public library. It's a predictable gig, mostly answering questions and keeping teenage noise levels down, but something felt off from the moment I walked out of the staff entrance at 8:15. 2 men were standing across the street, and they weren't just another part of the morning backdrop. Their presence was unsettling. Dark silhouettes in immaculate black wool suits, narrow ties in shoes, so pristine they looked freshly purchased. They stood motionless under a closed storefront's awning, staring directly at the library entrance. No coffee cups, no phone checking, no casual shifting of weight, just pure, unbroken observation. Their stillness was like a camera holding a perfect shot, their postures identical. My stomach sank with a precise, slow drop. They looked like movie extras waiting for a director's cue. I tried rationalizing their presence. Maybe they were waiting for someone. Perhaps private security. People wait on sidewalks all the time, right? I changed my route to the front door, but catching a glimpse of them in the bakery window confirmed they were still there, still watching. Inside the library, concentration became impossible. When someone asked about genealogy in microfilm, I mechanically pointed them in the right direction. My mind kept drifting back to the roof video I'd managed to recover on my backup drive. The file opened this time, but something was strange. A single frame showed the lights folding inward, completely whited out, as if that instant had been deliberately erased. No matter how I scrubbed through the video, that white frame remained, lasting the briefest moment. I couldn't take it anymore. I told my supervisor I wasn't feeling well and needed to leave. The scope I'd packed away earlier seemed to whisper its own strange story. The corrupted file on my phone a reminder that some moments slip away before you can truly grasp them. I walked back to the staff entrance, my chest tight. The 2 men were still there, under the plane trees by the newsstand, unmoving. Their stare remained fixed on the library door, not following me, not approaching, just watching in a silent, spectator stillness until I rounded the corner and headed home. The entire journey back, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting them to trail me like characters from a cliché movie scene. The street seemed ordinary. A delivery van, distant train sounds, a kid cycling, someone mowing a lawn. The world continued its regular rhythm. I knew I should have called someone, police, a friend, my manager, but something held me back. How would two men are staring at my workplace sound over the phone? It seemed absurd, so I sat on my couch, trying to make sense of the white frame on my clipboard. I retrieved the backup card from the glove box, attempting to replay the moment. Something was off. The recording would play to the white frame, then suddenly jump forward a second, resuming as if nothing happened. It wasn't corrupted but altered, like someone had subtly edited the world's continuity. Over the next 2 days, strange occurrences accumulated. My apartment clock lost 7 minutes before catching up. My neighbor mentioned her baby monitor captured a burst of static at 2 a.m. No voice, just a thin sweep reminiscent of old radio tubes. My phone battery drained unusually quickly. The weather app fluctuated between different forecasts. Each incident was small, plausible, wearing the disguise of coincidence. On Wednesday, I returned to work, initially feeling clear-headed. That changed when I rounded the newsstand and saw them again. The same men in suits, positioned slightly further down, still watching the doors' comings and goings. A mother with a stroller paused, looked at them, then hurried away. Her sense of a normal morning subtly disrupted. The bus driver and shopkeeper exchanged a glance, then shrugged it off. Two men continued watching me. Twice I left work early, and both times they stood across the street, unmoving, staring until I disappeared. The city felt watched, like noticing a new camera you can't unsee. I walked home because habit is a tie. That night, I tried to be ordinary. Pasta simmered, dishes clattered clean. I pretended the sky was unchanged. Street light topaz filtered through blinds, looking familiar. A red headlamp waited in the drawer by the door just in case. Behind my closed eyelids, the white frame burned bright and jagged. I can't explain what happened. Those sidewalk men, those roof lights. The missing frame, was it a hole cut in time, a glitchy app, or electronics playing tricks with my nerves? Their faces were blank as copies, no sunglasses, nothing connecting them to the city's rhythm. The whole time an odd sensation nagged. They knew my telescope key's location, had memorized my video's white frame like a precise schedule. I considered vanishing, parking across town, sleeping at a friend's, changing clothes, but I didn't. Later that night, when my eyes closed, fragments of uncertainty flickered. We were returning from my sister's place, driving past town's edge on a clear, cold night. Stars looked sharp, moonlight threw crisp shadows across the road. Julie drove, and I cracked the window, loving the open air. Just off Route 19, maybe 10 minutes from home, something crossed the moon. Not clouds. This was solid, nearly perfectly circular. It moved slowly enough that I watched it block the light. Then moonlight returned, and it vanished. Julie saw it too. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. When I started to speak, she just nodded, eyes fixed ahead. We rode in silence, the road feeling emptier than before. We were driving home later than usual, though the night was typically quiet. As we approached our street's turn-off, I had dismissed my earlier unease. Maybe it was just a plane catching the light strangely, or a bird closer than it seemed. But when we pulled into the driveway, everything changed. A sleek, older Lincoln was parked just outside our drive's entrance. A man stood beside it, dressed in a black suit, white shirt, and black tie, no coat, despite the cold air that made his breath visible. He wasn't looking at us initially, instead staring across the street toward the tree line. Julie slowed the car almost to a stop. When he turned his head, the movement was precise, like an actor hitting a predetermined mark. His face was pale and thin, clean-shaven, without glasses. His eyes were dark, not just in color, but dark in a way that seemed to absorb all light. As Julie rolled forward, he moved toward her window. Not quickly, but with a certainty that suggested we wouldn't drive away. "You enjoy the show tonight?" he asked. His voice was flat, emotionless, completely at odds with his blank expression. We didn't respond immediately. Julie might have thought he was referencing something local, fireworks, perhaps, but he just stared, waiting. "What show?" she finally said. His mouth flickered with something almost like a smile. "The one you just saw," he replied, as if correcting her, implying we'd already acknowledged something. My stomach lurched. I wanted to ask what he meant, but my throat was suddenly dry. Julie remained silent, putting the car in park. An odd stillness surrounded us, not complete silence, but as if all other sounds had been pushed far into the background. For the first time, he looked directly at me. His gaze didn't shift between us, but locked onto me. "Do you have any questions?" I involuntarily shook my head. "Good. he said, then stepped back from the car. He retreated to the Lincoln, moving backwards while facing us, sliding into the driver's seat without looking down, his movements unnervingly deliberate. Julie pulled up the driveway fast, and we arrived at the garage. She didn't get out immediately. Instead, we both sat there, scanning the mirrors. The street was completely empty. The next morning, I went out early to fetch the paper. 2 sets of tire tracks marked the shoulder where the car had been parked, but the frost held no footprints, not even our own from the previous night. Around 8, I started my hike, hoping to reach the lookout by noon and maybe have lunch with a view. The weather was unpredictable that morning, sunny one moment, and sudden cold gusts sweeping across the ridge. Rain hung in the air, though the clouds kept breaking apart before any droplets could fall. The trail opened onto a bare rock stretch, completely treeless for about 200 yards. That's when something caught my eye against the sky. Initially, I mistook it for a hawk suspended in an updraft, but it remained perfectly still. The wind whipped around me, tugging at my jacket and pack straps, yet this object didn't budge. I stopped and stared. It wasn't black, but a flat, lifeless gray without any shine or shadow. Moving closer, I realized it wasn't bird-shaped at all, but a perfect triangle. Geometrically perfect, 3 identical sides with corners so sharp they seemed capable of cutting through the air. Setting down my pack, I pulled out my bird-watching binoculars. Through the lenses, it became even more bizarre. No texture, no panels, no wings, just a solid, featureless triangle hanging motionless as if someone had pinned a matte black metal shape to the sky. Despite the swaying trees and fragmenting clouds, its edges remained completely still. I watched for what felt like a full minute before lowering the binoculars to blink and rub my eyes. When I looked back, it had vanished. Only blue sky and moving clouds remained. An inexplicable feeling washed over me. My stomach dropped, and my skin tingled with an unsettling sense that something was profoundly wrong. I scanned the sky for 10 minutes, searching for any trace of that impossible shape. The wind blew hard, carrying a low, almost humming sound from somewhere down the slope. I couldn't quite place it. After a wooded section of the trail dipped ahead, I tried to calm my nerves, telling myself I was just being jumpy. But as I moved deeper into the trees, something felt wrong. The branches stood perfectly still. No leaves rustled. My footsteps sounded unnaturally loud. I kept checking my phone, watching the signal bars fluctuate between 1 and none. About half an hour in, a sound caught my attention from behind. Not quite footsteps, but a single crunch on the gravel, followed by absolute silence. When I turned, nothing was there. The sound repeated, maybe 20 feet back. This time when I looked around, the woods seemed emptier, stripped of color and movement. I quickened my pace, trying to convince myself these were just normal forest sounds. A small clearing appeared, bathed in pale, washed-out sunlight that seemed more like early morning, despite my watch showing nearly noon. The earlier humming returned, now higher-pitched and barely audible. At the lookout, I was completely alone. Usually, other hikers would be around, but not today. I scanned the horizon, half hoping to see that shape again, just to confirm I hadn't imagined it. The wind, typically strong at this elevation, was eerily calm, barely moving my hair. I sat on a large, flat rock to eat, but couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept glancing back toward the trail, expecting to see someone approaching. Nothing, just motionless trees and that strange bright grass in the clearing below. Heading back down, the woods felt different again. No insects. No birds. The usual wind noises gradually returned near the lower switchbacks, and my phone's signal stabilized. It was like crossing back into normal from somewhere else entirely. At the trailhead, 2 other cars sat beside mine, but no people were visible. I sat in my car, processing the strange experience. I wasn't planning on going to the party. Matt Sanders, a co-worker at our small Portland marketing firm, had invited me over for a casual get-together on a Friday night. I was tired, but figured why not? Maybe I'd meet some new people outside the office. Matt's apartment sat on the 3rd floor of an old brick building in southeast Portland. The space had a warm, lived-in feel with mismatched furniture and plants scattered everywhere. It was the kind of place that invited you to settle in for a quiet evening. Outside, chilly early November rain fell, but inside, a faint scent of cedar and something sweet like cinnamon or vanilla lingered. I stood near the kitchen, nursing a beer, when a guy approached me, mid-30s, clean-cut, wearing a plain grey sweater and dark jeans. He looked familiar, yet I was certain we'd never met. He smiled and said, "Hey, you must be Rachel Lynn Peterson." I blinked, That's my full name, middle name and all, and I hadn't even introduced myself to anyone. How did he know that? Yeah, that's me, I responded cautiously, trying to place him. Do we know each other? He shook his head, still smiling like he already knew the answer. No, we haven't met. I'm Mark. I'm a friend of Matt's. Matt was nowhere nearby, so I figured he was telling the truth. But something felt off about the way Mark said my name, not just formally, but like he'd spoken it many times before, perfectly. Before I could ask how he knew my full name, Mark threw me completely off balance. How have you been dealing with that accident you had when you were 7? The one at the lake? I froze. The accident. Just before leaving, I'd spent time staring up at the ridge, thinking about pulling out my binoculars, but hesitating. I kept imagining that if I saw the triangle again, I wouldn't be able to convince myself it was just a trick of the light. When I finally drove home, I constantly checked the sky in my mirrors. I never saw it again. I kept it locked away, never sharing the story with anyone. Not my co-workers, not my friends, not even family beyond my parents and sister. It was messy, weird, and something I preferred to avoid discussing. At the party, Mark approached me with a knowing smile. You know the day you fell through the ice at Silver Creek, he said. Your mom almost lost you. That was pretty serious. I blinked hard, trying to make sense of his words. That incident happened years ago, and no one at this gathering knew about it. Mark nodded as if it were obvious. Matt mentioned it once, he said casually. I glanced over at Matt, who was chatting with others, appearing completely unaware. Matt told you? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. Mark shrugged. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Doesn't matter much. Then he added, almost offhandedly, it's a miracle you're still here. The room suddenly felt colder. I tried to dismiss his comments as mere nosiness, but his calm, steady gaze eyes that didn't quite blink like a normal person's made my skin crawl. Quickly, I changed the subject. So how do you know Matt? His smile shifted, seeming rehearsed. Oh, we've known each other a long time. He's a good friend. I nodded, feeling the weight of our conversation settling in my chest. Throughout the night, I kept catching Mark's eye. Each time, he seemed to be studying me, as if trying to see something deeper. Later, stepping outside for fresh air, I noticed the rain had stopped. Street lights cast long shadows on the wet pavement as I tried to clear my head. When I returned inside, Mark had vanished. I asked Matt about his whereabouts, but Matt just shrugged, claiming he didn't know anyone by that name. The next day at work, I cautiously brought it up. Hey, who was that guy at your party? Mark something? Matt looked puzzled. Mark? I don't think I invited anyone named Mark. I described him in detail, the grey sweater, his distinctive smile. Matt insisted no one matching that description had been there. I checked with co-workers, but no one remembered a Mark. Doubt crept in. Had I imagined the entire encounter? But the way Mark had spoken my full name, his unsettling knowledge, it felt too real to be a mere figment of my imagination. I don't usually get calls in the middle of the night, and this one was weird from the start. My phone rang at exactly 3:33 a.m., a time that's burned into my memory. Half asleep, I fumbled on the bedside table for the phone. The screen lit up with no caller ID. I hesitated, then answered. Hello! A calm voice replied. Not unfamiliar, but not someone I could place either. Quiet, smooth, steady. Do you remember who you really are? I sat up straight, heart pounding. Who is this? No answer. Just the same calm voice again, repeating, do you remember who you really are? The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long minute. Tried calling back, but the number was blocked. That was the start of it. I'm Ethan. I live in a small house just outside Flagstaff, Arizona, where the desert meets the forest and the night sky is so clear you can see every star. By day, I'm a software engineer with a pretty average life. No one weird, no enemies, no secret past. At least that's what I thought. After that call, I couldn't sleep. The question spun in my head. Who do I really am? I kept thinking about my childhood, my parents, everything I knew about myself. Nothing felt off, but still something about that voice felt like it knew more than I did. The next few days were strange. I kept getting phone calls, always at odd hours, always the same voice, always just the one question. Do you remember who you really are? No answers, no explanations. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe this? A few days later, I found a voicemail on my phone. It was just static, but underneath it, I thought I heard a faint voice saying my full name, Rachel Lynn Peterson, over and over, slow and deliberate. I called Matt, but he didn't pick up. No one did. That night, I kept checking my phone, waiting for another call or message, but there was nothing else, just silence. I don't know who that guy was, or how he knew things about me I never told anyone. Sometimes I wonder if I was just tired and imagining things, but the watch on my wrist ticked the same way the old clocks at that flea market did, steady and unchanging. And that feeling of being watched didn't leave me for days. Maybe some things are just too quiet to explain. I had started noticing something strange. Gaps in my memory that went beyond typical forgetfulness. These weren't just momentary lapses, but felt like entire scenes missing from my life's narrative. The incidents began with a hike near Kendrick Peak. The weather was cool and windy, a day that should have been enjoyable. Instead, an unsettling sensation crept over me. Footsteps echoed behind me, but each time I turned, no one was there. The forest shadows seemed distorted, stretching impossibly, not aligning with their sources. At work, things grew more peculiar. I'd suddenly disconnect, losing track of tasks. My co-workers noticed me zoning out. My boss even pulled me aside, concerned. My computer would occasionally flicker with static-like interference, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. The mysterious phone calls started it all. They weren't from standard networks. The data showed strange scrambling. A repeated question that felt more menacing than playful. I considered reporting it, but couldn't pinpoint any concrete threat. One night, a figure appeared outside my window. Tall, slender, wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. When I blinked, they disappeared. Later, driving home at sunset, I passed an abandoned pickup truck. In a nearby field, I thought I glimpsed the same mysterious figure. I started documenting everything. The unexplained calls, the strange apparitions, the memory disruptions. Something was happening, but I couldn't comprehend what. It felt like I was being watched, observed by something not quite human. The incidents continued to accumulate, each more unsettling than the last. The persistent sense of being monitored, of something existing just beyond my perception, grew stronger with each passing day. A knock on the door at 1 a.m. caught me off guard. I peered through the peephole. Nothing. Slowly, I opened the door to find an empty doorstep with just a small folded piece of paper. The neat handwriting read, "Do you remember who you really are?" Shaken, I called my best friend Mark the next morning. He was skeptical at first, thinking I was stressed, but as I described the paper and the mysterious figure, his tone changed. "Okay, that's weird," he said. "Want me to come over?" He did, and we spent the entire night investigating. We combed through my phone records, examined the paper, and checked the security footage. Frustratingly, the camera showed nothing unusual. No figure, no footsteps. The calls continued every few days, always from the same voice, always asking the same question. The paper appeared twice more in unexpected places, my mailbox and car dashboard. Then something shifted. During the day, I began catching glimpses of a figure at the edge of my vision. Whenever I tried to look directly, it vanished. There was something off about its movement, too smooth, too deliberate, like a poor imitation of human walking. I became paranoid. No more solo hikes. Every door and window got locked. But the calls persisted. About a month after the first incident, everything changed. Alone in my kitchen, I answered the phone immediately when it rang. "Do you remember who you really are?" the voice asked. Suddenly, a soft buzzing filled the room. Lights flickered. The temperature plummeted. Then a whisper, "You're closer than you think." The line went. After that night, the calls stopped. The mysterious figure disappeared, but something remained. A constant feeling of being watched followed. The gaps in my memory still haunt me. Sometimes I wonder if I'm truly the person I believe myself to be. I'm Jesse Martin from a small town near Conroe, Texas. Lake Livingston has been part of my life since childhood, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. I know this lake like the back of my hand. My old boat passed down from my granddad has been my companion on countless nights when the only sounds are water and crickets. That's my kind of peace. It was a late summer evening, a few months back, when things got strange. Around 9 p.m., I'd taken the boat out, hoping the crappie might bite better under the moonlight. The lake was perfectly still, with just a few ripples from my boat cutting through the water. Stars blanketed a clear sky, and the intense Texas heat had mellowed into a cool night. I was near an old cypress stand about a mile from the North Shore, one of my favorite fishing spots. Lines in the water, I noticed something unusual in the lake's center. Initially, I thought it might be a boat with a spotlight, since late-night fishers aren't uncommon. But this was different. Two pale, parallel light beams shone straight down from the sky, soft and deliberate. They scanned the water's surface methodically, moving slowly side to side. About 10 or 15 feet apart, they swept in perfect synchronization. Eerily, Not a single sound disrupted the gentle water slapping against my boat's hull. I first suspected a plane with searchlights, but scanning the sky revealed nothing. No wings, no navigation lights, just these beams coming from impossibly high up. When I tried to capture the moment on my phone, the screen froze completely. After 30 seconds, it resumed normally, and checking my photos showed no trace of the lights. For what seemed like 5 minutes, the beams continued their precise scanning. Then they began fading, first one, then the other, until darkness reclaimed the lake's surface. Bewildered, I sat motionless before starting the boat and heading toward shore, my mind wrestling with what I'd just witnessed. The whole experience made absolutely no sense. I'd driven this route 27 times before, my brother always joking I could navigate it with my eyes closed. But that night, something felt off. 2 hours past Saint Angelo, cruising the long flat stretch near Mesquite Draw, the sky started acting strange. At first, it was subtle. Glancing up to check my bearings, I noticed the stars weren't behaving normally. Out here, there's not much to see besides stars and occasional blinking oil rigs. Some seemed to shimmer differently. Not quite twinkling, but more like someone was bending light through a thin piece of glass. When I blinked, the pattern shifted. I told myself it was just fatigue. I'd been up since before dawn, and Waco felt like a distant memory. Still, a tightness gripped my chest. A warm, dry wind swept through, carrying a faint metallic scent. Ozone, I guessed, from distant storms or some machinery. The radio was playing low, an old Willie Nelson track, when it suddenly stuttered. Microsecond hiccups made me think it was a transmission issue. I flipped the dial. Static, then silence. The dashboard lights remained steady, speed unchanged. It seemed small, explainable. Bad reception, perhaps. But then the GPS went black. The little map vanished mid-route. My phone buzzed as if wanting to make a call, then died completely. Something was definitely wrong. Later at the dock, I told Ray about the strange lights. He laughed it off, suggesting it might have been a reflection from a plane or highway truck. Could be, but I knew what I saw didn't match any normal explanation. That night, I scoured the news and social media. No reports of unusual lights or aircraft in the area. Nothing. Since then, those moments replay in my mind, the precise way those pale beams moved, like a calculated search. The frozen phone, the eerie silence. I'm hesitant to claim something otherworldly, but I know it wasn't just a typical light show. Now, when I'm out on the lake, I find myself scanning the sky, hoping to see those beams again, wondering what they were seeking. But the lake, like me, keeps its secrets. I let the truck slow on the gravel, pulling off the long, shoulderless road. My headlight beams stretched higher, and the sky transformed. Stars weren't just shimmering anymore, they looked distorted, like water-warped glass. When I raised my hand, starlight smeared around my fingers. The truck hummed beneath me, engine idling. My phone screen stayed blank. I hit the power button repeatedly. Nothing. The cheap digital clock on the dash remained lit and accurate, which gave me a tiny sliver of comfort. I rationalized. The phone needed charging, the GPS had glitched, I was hallucinating from skipped meals. I was used to fixing things, tuning them until they ran right. Then the truck's electronics began failing systematically. The stereo died first. The instrument cluster dimmed and went black. The small night heat fan stopped. The engine hiccuped and slowed. I turned the key. Silence. The truck rolled to a stop as if an invisible hand had pushed against its bumper. Only my breath and a thin, high wind remained. The world felt impossibly small and immediate. Strangely, I thought about the jackrabbit that used to cross our land outside San Antonio every spring. I wondered if that same rabbit might be seeing this exact sky. Deep in my bones, I knew I was alone on this vast, empty plain where people rarely passed through. My shoulders tensed. The usual West Texas insect hum seemed muted, like someone had turned down its volume. My heart raced. My throat was parched. I stepped out, drawn by habit to check under the hood, something I always do when something feels wrong. Movement felt better than sitting idle. The air was cool out here, with a metallic smell reminiscent of post-lightning conditions, though no storm was brewing. No distant thunder. The truck's radio antenna light remained dark. I walked a slow circle, finding nothing amiss. No people, no distant lights, just stars bent like spoons across the immense silent landscape. The dashboard clock's digital numbers stared back at me, stubborn and unmoving. 213. I leaned back in the truck seat, trying to steady my breathing as the sky shifted subtly overhead. The wind died completely, leaving an expansive silence that seemed to stretch inside my head. An old mechanic's words drifted through my thoughts. An engine is an organ. It needs its rhythm. I kept watching those numbers, 214, 215, waiting, promising myself I'd call someone in 5 minutes if nothing changed. Suddenly, my phone buzzed across the seat, like something had jolted it awake. My brother's message lit up the screen. "You still there?" He'd called earlier, worried about the big thunderstorm predicted out by Love. When I touched the screen, everything awakened at once. The GPS beeped shyly, the stereo motor spun, the engine gulped as I turned the key, and everything clicked on like someone flipping a breaker, the radio smearing into a song, instrument cluster glowing, clock ticking over as if nothing had happened. Relief washed over me. Feeling both ridiculous and vulnerable, I drove cautiously, scanning the horizon. Distant pump jacks nodded. Farm lights blinked. No strange glows, no figures. Later at a gas stop in Saint Cedar, Anae. "Angelo?" I told the kid behind the counter about my truck dying on the draw. He nodded knowingly, like it was a common summer issue. "Could be a short," he said. "We get storms and power flickers." He avoided saying anything truly weird. Folks around here don't speak openly about unexplained things. That night, my sister and I sat on my mom's porch, drinking coffee from paper cups, watching cottonwoods settle into darkness. My phone log showed an impossible 5-minute gap with no calls recorded. The dash clock had marched on, indifferent to the strange moment. Ghosts against the sky. Everything came back exactly 5 minutes later, and I haven't found a sensible mechanical explanation that fits every piece of it. My phone's map blanked out and then returned like someone had paused my view and then unpaused it. We'd texted each other during the drive, and she told me she'd had a short blackout at a house around the same time across town. I thought of the stars bending like glass and the dead electronics. My hands looked normal washing a dish afterwards. I know what I felt. Small and watched and oddly quiet. I drive that stretch sometimes because it's part of the route and part of the day. I keep looking up. Maybe out there nothing will happen but stars and wind and the occasional jackrabbit. Maybe that's all there ever was. But sometimes I catch a shimmer in a star and my fingers go numb for a second like the truck's key in my palm before the engine starts, waiting to see what the sky will do next. I was working third shift security at a mid-rise office building on Euclid Avenue right near East 9th. Middle of January, cold like it gets here, real sharp. The building wasn't the nicest in the world, mostly insurance offices, a dentist, and some logistics company that always smelled like printer ink. But it was quiet and the pay was decent enough for sitting behind a desk, making rounds twice a night, and buzzing in the occasional janitor or food delivery. That night, a Thursday going into Friday, snow hadn't come down heavy, but the sidewalks had that thin, crunchy layer, not enough for a plow, just enough to slip on if you weren't looking. Around 1:15 a.m. I was sitting behind the desk eating a gas station turkey sandwich and watching one of those old true crime shows with the volume off, subtitles on. Lights were low, heat was humming, pretty normal. I glanced up at the security monitor for the front entrance. Standard camera angle pointing out toward the street. You could see the glass of the door, the sidewalk, and then across Euclid, the old 5-story parking garage that hadn't been in regular use since the pandemic. Just sat there mostly empty now, except during games or when people parked for the courthouse. The roof of that garage sits just about even with the 5th floor of our building. Something caught my eye on the roof of the garage near my building. At first I thought it might be a bird or raccoon, but the more I looked, the stranger it seemed. This dark shape was low to the surface, maybe 3 or 4 feet tall, just sitting there behind the concrete guardrail. It could have been a trash bag or a coat, but something felt off. Curiosity pulled me to the stairwell, and I climbed to the 5th floor break room with its wide window overlooking the garage roof. The shape was still there, sitting almost center, about 20 feet from the edge. Dark black or grey, it wasn't quite square or round, more like a crouched person, but unnaturally still. I waited a minute, watching for any movement. Nothing. I decided to use my flashlight, one of those big, heavy metal ones that can shine a good distance. I killed the break room lights to avoid glare, cracked the window, and swept the beam across the street. The moment the light touched it, everything changed. It rose smoothly like a balloon on invisible rails. No jerking, no sudden movements, just a controlled ascent, silent and steady. No rotors, no wings, no engine sounds. It lifted maybe 20 or 30 feet above the roof and then paused. That's when it happened. A slight tilt, as if looking directly at me. Something about that movement felt deliberate and unsettling. Then it continued upwards, sliding into the low-hanging clouds and vanishing. The entire encounter lasted barely 15 seconds. I stood frozen, trying to process what I'd just seen. I swept the flashlight around, hoping to catch another glimpse. Nothing. When I returned to the lobby, the front monitor showed nothing unusual. Just another ordinary moment, except for what I'd witnessed above. I was a security guard working a night shift like any other. Around midnight, something caught my eye on the camera feed. The door had frozen completely still, as if time had stopped. I tried tapping the screen, switching inputs. Nothing worked. Just a frozen frame of the sidewalk that stayed that way for almost 20 minutes before suddenly flickering back to life. When Maria, the third-floor janitor, came in around 2 a.m., I kept quiet. I didn't feel like explaining what I'd seen. During my second round at 3:20, everything inside the building seemed normal. But when I reached the top floor and looked out the break room window, something was off. The garage roof appeared empty, but the snow told a different story. It was untouched, a pristine white blanket with no footprints or marks. Except for one thing. Right in the center, a perfect round patch of bare concrete about 3 feet across. It looked like the snow had simply vanished with no signs of melting or displacement. No piles, no drips, just a clean circle on the roof. I stared at that patch for maybe 20 minutes, feeling a bit foolish and cold. Nothing else happened during that shift or the next. 2 days later, fresh snow had covered everything, erasing any trace of the strange circle. After that night, I started noticing odd things. Random camera power flickers that lasted just a second or two. A strange hum in the elevator, a high-pitched tone just at the edge of hearing. And sometimes, I'll admit, I still catch myself glancing at that rooftop from the break room. Not because I think something will happen again. I'm not sure what I think. I just can't stop looking. My name's Mike Turner, by the way. I'm just a regular guy who spends a lot of time fishing on the Ohio River near Cincinnati. That night, just past dusk, something happened that's been on my mind ever since. I was near the California neighborhood, where the water gets slower and darker under old bridges perfect for catfish or bass. I'd launched my John boat a couple of hours before sundown. Nothing special, just me, my fishing gear, and a few cold beers in a cooler. The river was calm, the sky mostly clear with low-hanging clouds, and the usual city sounds drifting across the water. I was fishing by the river downtown, rod set up, just relaxing and waiting for a catch. Something caught my eye on the water surface. At first I thought it was just reflections from a passing barge, but these weren't normal boat lights. They were faint, with a bluish-green glow, reminiscent of old fishing lures barely visible beneath the surface. The way they moved was peculiar. Instead of drifting like typical debris or watercraft, the lights seemed to twist and shift as if part of an unseen shape just under the water. It wasn't a solid form, more like a fluid light pattern that remained roughly in the same spot, about 20 feet from my boat. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it at the glowing area. The moment the beam touched the water, the lights vanished completely, as if someone had flipped a switch. Intrigued, I began flicking the light on and off. Each time, the lights would disappear when directly illuminated, but return when the beam moved away. I scanned the surrounding area. No other boats, no engine sounds, no navigation lights. The usual river traffic had died down as night fell, and even the barges had stopped moving. It was just me and the river and these mysterious lights. A sense of unease crept over me. I'd heard stories about river mysteries, but I'd never experienced anything like this. Wanting a closer look, I dipped our small boat net into the water where the lights had appeared. No splash, no resistance, just normal river water. But something felt different. The water temperature in that specific spot was warmer than the surrounding river, not cold as you'd expect at night. I set down the flashlight and watched. The lights returned, pulsing in almost deliberate patterns, like someone tracing shapes underwater with a glow stick. Despite the strangeness, I knew I wasn't dreaming. I was wide awake, watching something I couldn't explain. It was just another night on the river for me, Jake Mallory. I've spent most of my life navigating the tundra near Bethel, but this evening felt different from the start. A few minutes into my trip, something caught my eye. A faint ripple beneath the lights, more fluid than any fish or floating log. I blinked, and it vanished. When I reached for my phone to check the time or call a buddy, the signal was dead. Typical for these late-night outings. No big deal. I decided to keep watch and head back to the dock soon. Then the humming began. Not loud, but a low vibration that seemed to fill both air and water. It wasn't mechanical, more like a tone you feel rather than hear, blending with the river's soft rustling against my boat. A tickle on my neck made me scan the surroundings. The riverbank was pitch black, trees motionless and silent. No other boats, no wildlife, just that persistent humming and shifting lights below. As I prepared to reel in and head back, the lights suddenly disappeared, as if someone had pulled them under or switched them off. The humming faded with them. The ride home was strange. My radio kept cutting out, broadcasting static and faint, unrecognizable voices. No station should have been broadcasting then. My GPS blinked erratically, showing my location jumping unexpectedly. Back home, I meticulously checked my gear, seeking a logical explanation. Nothing seemed amiss, just an unsettling sense that the river had revealed something I wasn't meant to see. I don't share this story often. Around here, people either laugh or start spinning tales about river monsters and ghosts, and I'm not interested in that nonsense. I can't explain those lights or their behavior, but they weren't standard boat lights. Something else entirely. The river's been quiet since, but on calm nights with glassy water, I sometimes catch a glimpse of something glowing just beneath the surface. It shifts and pulses like a slow heartbeat, and I can't help wondering if it's still down there, waiting. Winter out here means constant work. Checking traps, hauling gear, just the routine that keeps people going. I'm not someone who usually tells wild stories, but what happened last January has stuck with me, and I can't shake it. The night was crystal clear and brutally cold, probably 20 below zero. Stars burned like pinpricks, and each breath felt like inhaling shards of ice. I was returning from a run near the Kuskokwim River, taking a shortcut across the flat tundra to save time. My snowmobile glided smoothly over hard-packed snow under the moon's soft glow. I'd been casually watching the sky, an old habit. The stars seemed endless, stretching beyond familiar constellations. Suddenly, something on the horizon caught my eye, a cluster of lights unlike any aircraft I'd ever seen. They blinked with an almost mechanical precision, arranged in a perfect triangular grid that was too symmetrical to be coincidental. My heart raced as I slowed down for a better view. These lights remained completely motionless, suspended silently against the dark, cold sky. The snowmobile's engine hummed distantly, as if the world had been muted. Instinctively, I pulled out my phone to capture a photo, knowing my old camera might struggle in the darkness. In that exact instant, the lights vanished. Not a gradual fade or a soft blink, just immediate, total absence. The sky returned to its normal starry state. I sat on my sled, bewildered, blinking repeatedly. A strange smell caught my attention, sharp and electric, like ozone mixed with burnt wood. I scanned the frozen ground, finding no evidence. No scorch marks, no smoke, just the usual tundra landscape. The odd scent lingered briefly before dissolving into the wind. I started the snowmobile again, heading back slowly and glancing over my shoulder, half expecting the lights to reappear. They never did. For days afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd witnessed. At the general store in Bethlo, people brushed off my story. Some said it was probably military drills. Others suggested satellites or airplanes. But nothing explained the strange smell or how quickly the lights vanished. No commercial planes fly that slow and silent, especially not in such an odd pattern. Weeks of my snowmobile runs became an investigation. I started taking different routes, scanning the ground near where I'd seen the lights. The snow remained untouched. No tracks, no burns. Only the air felt different, thicker, heavier, as if the cold itself had weight. My sled's radio began acting strange. Static would pop in and out, interrupting my favorite station. Once, I could have sworn I heard a faint pulse, almost like Morse code, though it made no sense. The cold was probably just messing with the electronics, I told myself. Then things got weirder. During rides, an unsettling feeling would wash over me, not like being watched by people or animals, but something else entirely. When I'd stop to check the engine or secure gear, I'd scan the surroundings. Nothing. Just endless white tundra and a frozen horizon. One night, a flicker of movement caught my eye beyond the tree line where the river bends, a light glint that wasn't fire or a flashlight. It moved too smoothly, almost floating, reflecting moonlight in an unnatural way. I pulled my jacket tighter and kept going, heart racing. After that, I started carrying extra gear, a flare gun, a handheld GPS, even a small digital recorder, just in case. But nothing ever showed up. No voices, no strange sounds. Just my breathing and the snowmobile's steady hum. Weeks passed. The weather warmed. Snow softened. The tundra began to thaw. Those weird smells and mysterious hummings vanished. Life returned to its usual rhythm, as much as it can in such a remote place. Yet sometimes, on a quiet, clear night, I still catch a glimpse of blinking lights on the horizon. Never the same pattern, always just a flash before they disappear. And occasionally, that faint, electric smell drifts by on the wind. I might never know what I saw, but under the endless Alaskan sky, some mysteries remain just that, mysteries. I apologize, but the text you've provided seems to be an incomplete fragment or out of context. Could you please share the full text that you would like me to rewrite? Without the complete passage, I cannot effectively restructure or rewrite the script while maintaining its original meaning.